The Texas sun hung heavy in the evening sky, bleeding red across the horizon as Colonel Elias Carter knelt before the twin graves, 15 years after the war between the states had ended, and 7 years since he'd buried his wife and daughter. The nightmare still came. Not of the war, those he'd learned to live with, but of their faces. Elizabeth with her honey gold hair and eyes that could pierce a man's soul, and little Emma, just 19 when the fever took her, with a laugh that could make flowers grow in the desert. "I brought wildflowers," Elias said, his voice rough from disuse. He placed the small bouquet between the wooden crosses, his weathered hands, once steady enough to command 1,000 men into battle, now trembling slightly. At 58, his body reminded him daily of all he'd survived. He removed his hat, revealing silver hair, still thick despite the years. The beard he'd grown since the war was neatly trimmed, though streaked with more gray than brown. He'd once stood tall and proud in a Union colonel's uniform, but now wore simple rancher's clothes, faded and worn like the man himself. "I still can't sleep in our bed, Lizzie," he whispered to the grave. "Been sleeping in my chair most nights. The ranch is holding together, though. That new stallion is working out fine." The wind picked up, stirring the grass around the small family plot on the edge of his property. In the distance, his ranch house stood silhouetted against the darkening sky, modest but solid, like everything Elias built. 100 acres of hardscrabble Texas land that had become his sanctuary and his prison. He was about to say more when the distant crack of gunfire split the evening stillness. Elias's head snapped up, his body tensing instinctively. 3 shots. Then a woman's scream carried on the wind. For a moment he remained frozen. This was no longer his fight. He'd sworn to Elizabeth as she lay dying that he was done with violence, done with the killing and the blood. He'd promised her peace. But the scream came again, desperate and primal. Before he could think, Elias was on his feet, moving with purpose toward the small stable. Inside, his bay stallion nickered as he grabbed saddle and bridle. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, muscle memory from 1,000 rush preparations for battle. "Sorry to cut the visit short," he muttered to the empty air, as if his wife could hear. As he swung into the saddle, his hand moved to his hip, where a Colt Peacemaker had once rested. The holster was empty now, had been for years. But the motion was instinctive as breathing. Instead, he reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a brass spyglass, a relic from the war. "Let's go, Thunder," he urged the horse, and they galloped toward the sound. They crested a small rise overlooking the main road to town. Through the spyglass, Elias spotted a stagecoach, stopped at an awkward angle, one wheel broken. Bodies lay motionless on the ground, the driver and what looked like a guard. Near the coach, 3 men on horseback surrounded 2 women. One woman lay crumpled in the dust, the other kneeling protectively over her. These weren't ordinary bandits. Their movements were too coordinated, their attack too precise. They were collecting the women, not the luggage. Elias had seen operations like this during the war, slaving parties, they'd called them then. His jaw clenched. This wasn't his fight, he reminded himself again. The town of Redemption was 5 miles east, with a sheriff who could handle this. A man his age had no business charging into gunfire. Then one of the attackers grabbed the kneeling woman by her hair, yanking her to her feet. Even from this distance, Elias could hear her defiant shout. "Damn it all," he growled, and dug his heels into Thunder's flanks. The stallion charged down the slope, raising dust that caught the last rays of sunlight. Elias had no gun, but he had surprise and momentum, and sometimes that was enough. The attacker spotted him too late. By the time they raised their weapons, Elias was already among them, Thunder's bulk slamming into one horse, sending its rider sprawling. Elias grabbed a fallen branch from the ground, swinging it with the full force of his weight into the second man's chest, knocking him from his saddle. The third attacker got off a shot that whistled past Elias's ear. Before he could fire again, Elias had Thunder rear up, hooves flailing dangerously close to the man's head. The attacker cursed, wheeled his horse around, and fled. His companions scrambled to follow, leaving their victims behind. Breathing hard, Elias dismounted. The smell of gunpowder hung in the air, mixed with dust and blood. For a moment, he was back on another battlefield, surrounded by other fallen bodies. He blinked away the memory and approached the women. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" he asked, his voice gravelly from disuse. The woman who had been kneeling looked up at him with fierce, intelligent eyes. She was perhaps 23, with dark hair escaping a once neat bun, her blue traveling dress torn and dusty. A teacher or governess, he guessed from her bearing. Despite the fear evident on her face, she maintained a dignity that spoke of inner strength. "Not me," she said, "but my friend has been shot." The injured woman lay curled on her side, blood seeping through her cream-colored dress near her shoulder. She was younger, perhaps 19, with golden hair and delicate features contorted in pain. Something about her struck Elias like a physical blow. She looked so much like Emma that for an instant he thought his mind had finally broken. "They're going to kill us," the blonde woman whispered, her voice faint. "You don't understand who they are." Elias knelt beside her, pushing aside the shock of her resemblance to his daughter. "Let me see," he said gently, examining the wound. "Bullet went through clean. We need to stop the bleeding." He tore a strip from his own shirt, working with the efficiency of a man who had bandaged far too many wounds. "What's your name?" he asked as he worked. "Abigail Moore," the dark-haired woman replied. "And this is Clara Dawson. We were traveling to Austin when those men attacked the coach." "Colonel Elias Carter," he responded automatically, then frowned at his own use of his former rank. "Just Elias is fine. My ranch is closer than town. Let's get you both there and tend to this wound properly." As he lifted Clara onto his horse, the young woman's eyes fluttered open. For a moment they locked with his, and Elias felt a jolt of recognition that made no sense. She looked like Emma, yes, but this was something more, as if he were looking at a ghost from his past that had nothing to do with his daughter. "Thank you," Clara whispered. Then her eyes rolled back as she lost consciousness. Abigail climbed up behind her, supporting her friend's limp body. "Who were those men, Colonel?" she asked as Elias took Thunder's reins and began leading them toward his ranch. "Not local bandits," Elias said grimly. "Too organized, too purposeful." He glanced up at her. "And they weren't after the stagecoach money. They were after you two." Abigail's face paled, but she nodded. "I feared as much. We've been running for weeks." "Running from what exactly?" Elias asked, squinting up at her. Abigail hesitated, then said in a low voice, "From powerful men who think they own the law. Men who believe they can take whatever and whoever they want." Something in her tone made Elias's neck prickle with foreboding. He'd heard similar words from runaway slaves during the war. But slavery had been abolished for years. Whatever these women were fleeing, it was something else. Something perhaps just as dark. "You're safe for now," he said, the words feeling strange on his tongue. He'd sworn to stay out of others' troubles, to live out his days in solitude. Yet here he was, already entangled in whatever danger surrounded these women. As they walked, Elias studied the horizon, alert for any sign of pursuit. The road stretched empty behind them, but that meant little. Men like those attackers rarely gave up so easily. By the time they reached his ranch, night had fallen completely. The modest two-story house stood dark against the star-filled sky, its wraparound porch offering the only welcome. "It's not much," Elias said as he helped Abigail get Clara down from the horse. "It's sanctuary," Abigail replied simply. Inside, Elias lit lamps, illuminating a home that was clean but sparse. No photographs adorned the walls. No decorative touches softened the practical furniture. It was the home of a man who lived there but didn't truly inhabit it. He carried Clara to the spare bedroom, not Emma's room, which remained untouched behind its closed door, and laid her gently on the bed. "I need hot water, clean cloths," he instructed Abigail, falling naturally into the commanding tone he'd used as an officer. As Abigail hurried to comply, Elias opened a cabinet in the hallway, retrieving a wooden box of medical supplies. During the war, he'd learned enough field medicine to keep men alive until real doctors could reach them. Those skills had rarely been used since, but he'd maintained the habit of keeping supplies ready. Working together, they cleaned and properly bandaged Clara's wound. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of her shoulder, missing bone and major blood vessels. Painful but not life-threatening if infection could be prevented. "You've done this before," Abigail observed as she watched his practice movements. "Too many times," Elias replied grimly. "During the war." Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, murmuring incoherently. Once she grabbed Elias's wrist with surprising strength, her eyes flying open. "The eagle ring," she whispered urgently. "Beware the eagle ring." Elias froze. "What did you say?" But Clara had already slipped back into unconsciousness, her grip going slack. Elias straightened slowly, his mind racing. An eagle ring, the signet worn by officers of the 7th Cavalry Regiment. His regiment, the one he had commanded before resigning his commission after the war. "What is it?" Abigail asked, noticing his reaction. Elias shook his head. "Nothing, old memories." He moved to the door. "Stay with her, I'll make coffee." In the kitchen, Elias's hands shook slightly as he stoked the stove. Clara's words had struck a chord that resonated with memories he'd long buried. The eagle ring was a symbol few would recognize, unless they had encountered the men who wore them. Men like him, and men like Marcus Whitley. The thought of his former second-in-command made Elias's jaw clench. Brigadier General Marcus Whitley, now Senator Whitley, the decorated war hero whose political star had risen meteorically in the years since. They had once been friends, brothers in arms, until Antietam, when Elias had discovered what Whitley was capable of, the atrocities committed against civilians in the name of victory. Their final confrontation had nearly ended in bloodshed. Instead, Elias had resigned and retreated to Texas, vowing never to speak of what he knew. And Whitley had gone on to fame and power, his dark deeds buried with the war's many other secrets. But why would a young woman like Clara Dawson know about the Eagle Ring? What connection could she possibly have to Marcus Whitley? The coffee was boiling over when Abigail entered the kitchen, startling him from his thoughts. "Colonel," she said hesitantly, "Clara's resting now, but she'll need a doctor eventually." Elias nodded, composing himself. "I'll ride into town at first light. There's a doctor there, Thompson. Good man." He poured 2 cups of coffee, handing one to Abigail. "Now, Miss Moore, I think it's time you told me what kind of trouble you're really in." Abigail wrapped her hands around the mug, her knuckles white. For a long moment, she seemed to be weighing how much to reveal. Finally, she met his gaze directly. "I was a teacher at a girls' school in Virginia," she began. "Clara was my student. Bright, kind, from a good family. Or so we all believed." She took a sip of coffee. "3 months ago, Clara came to me in tears. She'd discovered something about her past, about her real father." Elias remained silent, waiting. "Her mother had been a house servant who died in childbirth. The man who raised her, the man she called father, had actually adopted her. But her biological father was very much alive, a prominent man who had taken advantage of her mother." A familiar cold feeling settled in Elias's stomach. "And this man wears an eagle ring?" Miguel looked up sharply. "Yes, how did you—" "A guess," Elias cut her off. "Continue." "Clara wanted to meet him, to understand her history. I advised against it, but she went anyway." Abigail's voice grew strained. "When she returned, she was different. Frightened. She said she'd discovered something terrible. That her father wasn't just a man who'd abandoned his illegitimate child, but something much worse." "What had she found?" Elias asked, though he feared he already knew. "Documents, letters, evidence that her father was involved in human trafficking." Abigail whispered the last words, as if saying them aloud might summon the evil they described. Young women disappearing from poor communities, sold to wealthy men, or worse. Elias closed his eyes briefly. During the war, he'd encountered similar operations. Desperate civilians sold into servitude or prostitution. The practice should have died with the conflict, but he knew better than most how evil adapted rather than perished. "Clara confronted him," Abigail continued. "He denied everything, of course. But that night, men came to the school. They killed the headmistress, made it look like a robbery. They would have taken Clara too, but I happened to be awake. We escaped through a window." "And you've been running ever since," Elias finished. Abigail nodded. "We tried going to the authorities in Richmond, but his influence reaches too far. The sheriff there practically handed us back to his men. We've been moving west ever since, staying ahead of them. Until today." Elias rose from the table, walking to the window to stare out into the darkness. The responsibility settling on his shoulders was unwelcome but familiar, the weight of other people's lives. He'd carried it during the war, then set it down when he buried his family. He'd promised Elizabeth peace, not more bloodshed. But if Marcus Whitley was indeed Clara's father, if he was behind the trafficking operation Abigail described, then Elias had been wrong to remain silent all these years. His old comrade's corruption ran deeper than he'd ever imagined. "Be straight with me, Miss Moore," he said, turning back to face her. "Is Clara's father Senator Marcus Whitley?" Abigail's shock was answer enough. "How could you possibly know that?" Elias didn't reply immediately. Instead, he walked to a small desk in the corner, unlocking the bottom drawer with a key he kept around his neck. From inside, he withdrew a faded daguerreotype in a simple frame, a group of Union officers standing stiffly for the camera. He handed it to Abigail. "That's him, there," he said, pointing to a tall, distinguished-looking man with sharp features and cold eyes. "And that's me beside him." Abigail stared at the image, then up at Elias, comprehension dawning on her face. "You knew him. During the war." "He was my second in command, and once my friend." Elias's voice was flat. "Until I discovered what he was capable of." "What happened?" "Antietam, the bloodiest day of the war." Elias's gaze grew distant. "After the battle, Whitley took a detachment to secure a nearby town. When they returned, I heard rumors of atrocities. Civilians killed, women assaulted. I confronted him. He denied everything, claimed the townspeople had been Confederate sympathizers who fired first." Elias sat heavily in his chair. "I didn't have proof, so I took it to our superior. The matter was buried. Military necessity, they called it. But I knew what I'd seen in Whitley's eyes when I confronted him. The same look I'd seen in the worst men under my command. Men who enjoyed the killing. He took a deep breath. I resigned my commission not long after. Couldn't serve alongside him. Couldn't stop him. So I left. And now his past has found us both, Abigail said softly. Elias nodded grimly. If Whitley is involved in what you've described, then those weren't random bandits today. They were his men, sent to retrieve Clara and eliminate anyone who knew too much. Including me, Abigail whispered. Including you, Elias confirmed. He glanced toward the bedroom where Clara rested. How much does she actually know? Does she have proof of his operations? She memorized names, dates, locations. She was afraid to keep the actual documents. Abigail's hands twisted in her lap. Colonel Carter, I don't know what to do. We can't keep running forever. Elias rose again, moving to the window. Dawn was still hours away, but his decision couldn't wait for the light. He had sworn to Elizabeth to live peacefully, to avoid the violence that had defined his earlier life. But he had made other vows too, to protect the innocent, to stand against injustice. Vows that had once meant everything to him. Get some rest, Miss Moore, he said finally. Tomorrow, I'll go into town for supplies and to send a telegram. There are people who still owe me favors, people who might help us build a case against Whitley. You believe us then? You'll help? Elias turned to face her, his expression grave. I believe you, and yes, I'll help. But understand this, Marcus Whitley is no ordinary enemy. He has money, influence, and men willing to kill for him. This won't be easy, and it won't be without risk. Abigail straightened her shoulders, her exhaustion momentarily masked by determination. Clara and I have been at risk since the moment she found those documents. At least now we won't be facing him alone. Elias nodded, respecting her courage. There's a spare bedroom upstairs. Try to sleep. Tomorrow will come soon enough. After Abigail retired, Elias remained in the kitchen, the daguerreotype on the table before him. He studied Whitley's face, the sharp features that had only grown more distinguished with age, the confident posture of a man born to command. Now a senator, with whispers of gubernatorial ambitions, a war hero with a sterling reputation, and apparently a monster hiding in plain sight. Elias moved to a cabinet high above the stove, reaching behind canned preserves to withdraw a dusty bottle of whiskey. He poured a measure into his empty coffee cup, drinking it in one swallow. I'm sorry, Lizzie, he murmured. I know what I promised, but some sins can't be left buried. He walked to another cabinet, one that had remained locked for years. The key was hidden in a small box of Elizabeth's sewing notions. Inside the cabinet hung a gun belt, the leather still supple despite its age. The Colt peacemaker gleamed dully in the lamplight, cleaned and oiled before being put away, as if Elias had always known this day might come. He didn't remove it yet. That would be a final step he wasn't quite ready to take. Instead, he closed the cabinet, locking it again. Dawn was breaking when Elias finally dozed off in his chair, his dreams filled with battlefields and the faces of the dead, Elizabeth and Emma among them now, watching him with solemn eyes as he strapped on his old weapon once more. He woke with a start to the sound of hoofbeats approaching the ranch. Moving quickly to the window, he peered out to see a lone rider approaching at a steady pace. The man wore the star of the Redemption Town sheriff. Elias cursed under his breath. Word traveled fast in small towns. Someone must have found the stagecoach, connected it to him. He moved quickly to wake Abigail, then checked on Clara. The young woman was feverish but conscious. Someone's coming, he told them. The local sheriff. Stay in this room, keep quiet. Can we trust him? Abigail asked. I don't know yet, Elias replied honestly. Sheriff Jenkins and I have an understanding. I don't cause trouble. He doesn't bother me. But if he's looking for you two, he didn't finish the thought. If Jenkins was on Whitley's payroll, things were about to get complicated. What will you tell him? Clara asked weakly. Elias considered. As little as possible, but if it comes to it, I'll say you're my nieces, visiting from back east. He closed the bedroom door firmly and moved to meet the sheriff at the front of the house, stepping onto the porch just as the rider reined in. Sheriff Thomas Jenkins was a wiry man in his 40s, with a sun-weathered face and shrewd eyes that missed little. He nodded respectfully to Elias. Colonel Carter, he greeted him. Been a while. Sheriff, Elias returned evenly. What brings you out this way? Jenkins dismounted, tying his horse to the porch rail. Found a stagecoach about 3 miles east of here. Driver and guard dead. Passengers missing. Tracks leading this direction. His gaze was direct. Know anything about that? Elias maintained a neutral expression. Heard gunshots yesterday evening. Rode out to investigate. found the coach already abandoned. No passengers, no attackers. It wasn't a complete lie, but it wasn't the truth either. Elias watched the sheriff carefully, trying to gauge whether the man was simply doing his job or if he had other motives. "That's so," Jenkins said, his tone suggesting he didn't entirely believe Elias. "Strange coincidence. You just happening to be there." "Not really. Gunfire tends to carry in these parts." Elias leaned against a porch column. "Any idea who did it?" Jenkins removed his hat, running a hand through thinning hair. "Got some theories. Stage was carrying mail and money, but that was left behind. Suggests they were after something else." "Or someone else," Elias offered. "Indeed." Jenkins fixed him with a penetrating look. "There's something else you should know, Colonel. We've got visitors in town, important ones." "That right?" "Senator Marcus Whitley arrived 2 days ago, staying at the Grand Hotel, campaigning for governor." Jenkins watched Elias closely as he delivered this news. "Mentioned he was an old Army colleague of yours." Elias's expression betrayed nothing, though his pulse quickened. "Did he now?" "Said he might pay you a visit, for old time's sake." The warning in the sheriff's tone was subtle but unmistakable. Elias nodded slowly. "Appreciate the heads up, Sheriff." Jenkins settled his hat back on his head. "Also mentioned it he's looking for his secretary and a young lady under his protection. Seems they wandered off during their journey west. Quite concerned about them. Now they came to it." Elias kept his face carefully blank. "That's so?" Young ladies traveling alone can run into all sorts of trouble these days." Jenkins glanced around the ranch yard. "You haven't seen any strangers passing through, have you, Colonel?" "Can't say that I have," Elias lied smoothly. Jenkins studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Well, if you do, the senator's offering a reward for information leading to their safe return. $500. Generous of him. Isn't it just?" Jenkins remounted his horse. "I'll be continuing my investigation. Let me know if you remember anything else about that stagecoach." "I'll do that," Elias agreed. As the sheriff rode away, Elias remained on the porch, his mind working rapidly. Whitley was here, in redemption. Not a coincidence. He must have tracked the women this far, narrowed down their likely route, and now the net was tightening. Elias returned inside to find Abigail in the kitchen doorway, having obviously listened to the entire exchange. "He knows we're here," she said, her face pale. "He suspects," Elias corrected, "but he doesn't know for certain. Not yet." "What do we do now?" Elias's jaw set in a hard line. "We prepare. Because if I know Marcus Whitley, he won't rely on the sheriff to find you. He'll come himself." And as if summoned by his words, a plume of dust appeared on the distant road. Multiple riders approaching from the direction of town. "Get back to Clara," Elias ordered. "Lock the door and don't come out until I call for you." As Abigail hurried to comply, Elias moved to the locked cabinet. This time he didn't hesitate. The key turned smoothly and the gun belt felt like a reunion with an old friend as he strapped it on. The weight of the Colt against his hip was both familiar and foreign after so many years. He checked the loading mechanically, muscle memory taking over. 6 bullets in the cylinder. 6 chances against whatever was coming. Through the window, he could make out at least 4 riders now, and at their head, a figure sitting straight and proud in the saddle, a posture Elias would recognize anywhere. Senator Marcus Whitley had come calling after all. Elias Carter stepped onto his porch, the floorboards creaking beneath his boots, a sound as familiar as his own heartbeat after 15 years on this ranch. The weight of the Colt at his hip felt like greeting an old friend he'd hoped never to see again. He kept his hand deliberately away from the weapon as the riders approached. Senator Marcus Whitley led the small procession, sitting tall in his saddle despite his 60 years. Time had been kind to him. His once dark hair was now silver at the temples, lending him an air of distinguished authority. His immaculate black suit and string tie would have looked out of place on most men riding the Texas plains. But Whitley wore them with the same confidence he had once worn his military uniform. Behind him rode 3 men whose hard eyes and ready hands marked them as hired guns, not political aides. "Colonel Carter," Whitley called as he reined his horse to a stop in the yard. His voice carried the refined accent of Virginia aristocracy that no amount of time in Washington had diminished. "It's been far too long." "Senator," Elias acknowledged with a slight nod, "didn't expect to see you in these parts." Whitley dismounted with the fluid grace of a lifelong horseman. As he removed his riding gloves, sunlight glinted off the gold signet ring on his right hand, an eagle with wings spread, clutching arrows in its talons. The symbol of the 7th Cavalry Regiment, worn now as an ostentatious reminder of past glories. "I was in redemption for a campaign event when I heard an old comrade in arms lived nearby. Whitley said, approaching the porch. Thought I'd pay my respects. His smile didn't reach his eyes, cold, gray, and calculating as ever. That's mighty considerate, Elias replied evenly. But as you can see, I'm not much for company these days. Whitley's gaze swept over the modest ranch house, the weathered barn, the empty fields beyond. So I see. Quite the change from commanding a regiment. His tone suggested he found Elias's current circumstances pitiful. May I come in? For old time's sake? It wasn't really a question. Refusing would only confirm what Whitley surely already suspected, that Elias was hiding something, or someone. Of course, Elias said, stepping aside, though I'm afraid I've nothing to offer but coffee. Coffee would be perfect. Whitley turned to his men. Wait here. The colonel and I have some catching up to do. Inside, Elias led the way to his sparse kitchen, maintaining a careful position that kept his body between Whitley and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. He busied himself with the coffee pot, using the routine to gather his thoughts. You've become quite the hermit, Elias, Whitley observed, removing his hat and placing it on the table. I was surprised when I learned you were still alive. Many of our compatriots haven't been so fortunate. War has a way of finding men, even after it's over, Elias replied. Indeed. Whitley's eyes narrowed slightly. I heard about Elizabeth and your daughter. My condolences. Fever, wasn't it? The casual mention of his family sent a spike of anger through Elias that he carefully controlled. 7 years ago, he said flatly. Thank you for your sympathies. Elias placed 2 mugs of coffee on the table, then sat across from his unwelcome visitor. For a moment, neither man spoke, each taking the measure of the other across years of silence and secrets. Why are you really here, Marcus? Elias finally asked. Whitley's thin lips curved in something approximating a smile. Direct as ever. Very well. He leaned forward. I'm looking for 2 young women who've gone missing from my household. My secretary, Miss Abigail Moore, and my ward, Miss Clara Dawson. Your ward? Elias kept his expression neutral despite his surprise. A recent arrangement, Whitley said smoothly. Her adoptive father was a supporter of mine who passed away rather suddenly. I took responsibility for the girl out of respect for our friendship. He sipped his coffee. They were traveling ahead of me to Austin when their stagecoach was attacked yesterday. The driver and guard were killed, but the women were nowhere to be found. A tragedy, Elias murmured. But I fail to see what this has to do with me. Sheriff Jenkins discovered tracks leading in this direction, Whitley said. And given your military background, I thought perhaps they sought refuge here. I've seen no one, Elias lied, meeting Whitley's gaze steadily. The senator studied him for a long moment, then set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. Elias, let's not play games. Miss Dawson is confused, suffering from delusions brought on by her grief. She's made some rather outlandish accusations that could damage my reputation if repeated publicly. And Miss Moore, I fear, has been enabling these fantasies rather than helping the poor girl. Sounds like a matter for doctors, not hired guns, Elias said, nodding toward the men waiting outside. Security precautions. A man in my position has many enemies. Whitley's expression hardened slightly. If you're harboring these women, Elias, you're not helping them. You're putting them and yourself in danger. Is that a threat, Senator? A statement of fact. Whitley stood, his full height impressive even at 60. I'm prepared to forget any misunderstandings if you simply tell me where they are. I'll ensure they receive the care they need, and you can return to your solitude. Elias rose as well, his own 6-foot frame still powerful despite the years. If I see anyone matching their description, I'll be sure to let Sheriff Jenkins know. Whitley's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I see. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small leather case, placing a calling card on the table. My temporary address in Redemption. Should you remember anything helpful? As they walked to the door, Elias felt Whitley's eyes scanning every corner of the visible house, looking for signs of the fugitives. One last thing, Colonel, Whitley said as he stepped onto the porch. You should know that Miss Moore is wanted for murder. The head mistress of the school where she taught was found dead shortly before the young women disappeared. His tone was conversational, but his eyes were cold. Something to consider before you involve yourself in matters that don't concern you. Elias's expression revealed nothing. I'll keep that in mind, Senator. Whitley settled his hat on his head and stepped down to his waiting horse. It truly was good to see you again, old friend. Despite our differences of opinion during the war, I've always respected your courage. Likewise, Elias lied. He watched as Whitley and his men mounted up and rode away, waiting until they were distant specks on the horizon before letting his rigid posture relax. Only then did he notice his hand had come to rest on the butt of his revolver as if his body had known what his mind refused to acknowledge, that he had just faced an enemy as dangerous as any he'd encountered on the battlefield. The bedroom door opened behind him, and Abigail stepped out, her face pale but composed. "He knows we're here," she said quietly. "Yes," Elias agreed, "but he's not certain enough to force the issue, not yet. You heard what he said about me, about the murder." "I did." Elias turned to face her. "Is it true?" Abigail's eyes flashed with indignation. "I didn't kill Headmistress Collins. Whitley's men did, to silence her after she helped us escape. But they've obviously twisted the story to serve their purposes." Elias nodded, unsurprised. It was exactly the kind of calculated move Whitley would make, using legitimate authorities to do his dirty work. "How is Clara?" he asked. "Awake, but feverish. She needs a doctor, Colonel." Elias considered their options. None of them good. Going to town would risk exposure, but Clara's wound could turn deadly without proper care. "I know someone who might help," he said finally. "An old friend who keeps his own counsel. But first, we need to move you both to somewhere safer than this house." "Where?" Abigail asked. "I have a small cabin about a mile from here, near the creek. Built it as a shelter during roundup season. It's not comfortable, but it's well hidden." Elias moved to the window, checking the road again. "We'll wait until dark, then move Clara there. I'll ride to town afterward to find help." Abigail nodded, then hesitated. "Colonel Carter, may I ask why you're helping us? You're risking everything, and you barely know us." Elias was silent for a long moment. "I knew Marcus Whitley during the war. Saw what he was capable of then and did nothing. Perhaps this is my chance to set that right." He didn't mention the other reason, that Clara's resemblance to Emma had stirred something in him he'd thought long dead, a need to protect, to make one thing right in a world that had taken so much from him. "Rest now," he told Abigail. "Tonight will be difficult for all of us." As dusk fell, Elias prepared for their departure. He loaded supplies onto a small wagon, food, water, extra blankets, and medical supplies. He harnessed his oldest horse to the wagon, leaving Thunder free for the ride to town. As he worked, his mind kept returning to Whitley's visit. The senator's appearance in Redemption was no coincidence. He had obviously been tracking the women for weeks, narrowing down their path, perhaps through telegrams to sheriffs along the likely routes west. That meant Whitley considered them a serious threat, not merely a potential embarrassment. Whatever Clara had discovered must be substantial. Evidence that could damage not just Whitley's reputation, but perhaps his freedom. Inside, Elias found Clara sitting up in bed, her face flushed with fever, but her eyes clear. Abigail had helped her change into one of Elias's old shirts, several sizes too large but clean. "Colonel Carter," Clara said softly, "thank you for your kindness." "No need for thanks," Elias replied gruffly, uncomfortable with gratitude. "We need to move you tonight. Think you can manage a short journey?" "I'm stronger than I look," she said with a faint smile that reminded him painfully of Emma. Elias nodded, then addressed them both. "Once you're settled, I'll go to town to find a doctor I trust and send a telegram to an old contact in the federal marshal's office. If what you've discovered about Whitley is true, we'll need official help to bring him down." "Will your friend believe us against a United States senator?" Abigail asked skeptically. "Marshal Davies and I served together before the war. He's no friend of Whitley's." Elias checked his pocket watch. "It's dark enough. Let's go." Moving Claire to the wagon was a careful process. Elias carried her as gently as possible, but each jostle brought a grimace of pain to her face, though she made no sound. Once they were underway, traveling slowly along an overgrown track rather than the main road, Elias kept alert for any sign of pursuit. The cabin, when they reached it, was little more than a one-room shelter with a stone fireplace, a narrow cot, and a rough table with 2 chairs. But its location, nestled in a small grove of cottonwoods near a bend in the creek, made it nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. "It's not much," Elias said as he carried Clara inside, settling her on the cot. "It's perfect," Abigail replied, already moving to light the single oil lamp. Elias showed them where he'd stored the supplies and the extra ammunition for the rifle he was leaving with them. "Bolt the door behind me," he instructed, "and don't open it for anyone but me. If trouble comes, there's a trap door under the rug that leads to a root cellar. It's small, but you can hide there until danger passes." Abigail took the rifle, handling it with unexpected familiarity. "My father taught me to shoot," she explained, seeing his raised eyebrow. "He said a woman alone needed to protect herself." "He was right," Elias acknowledged. "I'll be back before dawn. Try to keep the lamp low. Light carries at night." With that, he mounted Thunder and rode toward Redemption, pushing the horse harder than he would have preferred. Time was not on their side, and he needed to reach his allies before Whitley could close the net further. Redemption had grown since Elias first settled in the area 15 years ago. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted several streets of proper buildings, a hotel, a bank, a church, and various businesses catering to the growing population of ranchers and farmers. At night, however, it returned to its frontier roots. The boardwalks rolled up, save for the saloon and the hotel. The Grand Hotel where Whitley was staying stood on the main street, its windows still brightly lit despite the late hour. Elias rode past it carefully, keeping to the shadows, and tethered Thunder behind the smithy at the edge of town. The blacksmith's house, attached to his shop, showed a light in one window. Elias approached cautiously and knocked a specific pattern on the back door. 3 quick raps, a pause, then 2 more. After a moment, he heard movement inside, and the door opened to reveal a powerfully built black man in his 50s, a wary expression on his face that softened to surprise when he recognized his visitor. "Elias Carter," he said in a deep voice. "Been a long time." "Too long, Samuel," Elias agreed. "May I come in?" Samuel Wells stepped back, allowing Elias to enter the small but meticulously kept kitchen. Once the door was closed, the 2 men clasped hands in a grip that spoke of shared history. "You're out late," Samuel observed, "and armed." His eyes had immediately noted the gun belt Elias wore. "I'm in trouble, old friend, or rather helping those who are." Samuel gestured to a chair at his kitchen table. "Sit. Tell me." Elias gave him a concise account of the past 24 hours, leaving out nothing. Samuel was one of the few people who knew the full story of Elias's history with Whitley. They had served together when Samuel was assigned to the 7th as a blacksmith and farrier. Technically a civilian contractor, but in practice a soldier without the recognition. "The senators in town, making speeches, shaking hands," Samuel confirmed when Elias finished. "Got half the town eating from his palm, with talk of bringing the railroad through Redemption." His expression darkened. "The other half ain't so welcome at his gatherings, if you take my meaning." Elias nodded grimly. Whitley's well-documented stance against Reconstruction and civil rights for formerly enslaved people was part of his political appeal in certain circles. "I need your help, Samuel. The girl's wound needs tending, and I don't trust taking her to Dr. Thompson if Whitley's got the town watched." Samuel considered. "My sister's boy, Isaiah, is studying medicine in Austin. Comes by his skill honest. His grandmother was a healer back in Carolina. He's visiting for a few days. Doesn't have a formal license yet, but he knows more than most who do. Can he be trusted?" "With my life," Samuel said firmly, "and he owes me more than one favor." "Good, and I need to send a telegram to Marshal Davies in Austin." Samuel frowned. "Telegraph office is closed till morning, and the operator, Jenkins' cousin, talks more than some magpie. Whatever you send will be all over town by noon." Elias cursed softly. "Then I need paper and pen. I'll write to Davies instead, but the letter needs to leave on tomorrow's stage." While Samuel gathered the writing materials, Elias stared into the small fire burning in the kitchen stove, his mind working through their options. Even with a doctor for Clara and a message to Davies, their position was precarious. Whitley wouldn't wait long before making another move, and next time he might not be so diplomatic. "You're taking an awful risk, Elias," Samuel said as he set paper and ink on the table. "Whitley's a powerful man with powerful friends." "I know, but if what those women say is true, he's also a monster who's been hiding in plain sight for years." Samuel nodded slowly. "Reckon some monsters need facing." He paused. "There's something else you should know. Sheriff Jenkins was asking questions about you in town today. Specific questions about whether you've had any visitors lately." Elias's pen paused mid-word. "Whose side is he on?" "Hard to say. Jenkins plays things close, but he seemed troubled after speaking with the senator." That was interesting. Jenkins had always struck Elias as a fair man, if not an especially courageous one. If he was having doubts about Whitley's story, that could be useful. "One more thing," Samuel added hesitantly. "There's talk of a reward for information about the women. $500. That's a fortune to most folks around here." "Would anyone in Redemption recognize them?" Elias asked. The stagecoach passed through before the attack. They might have been seen. It was another complication in an already dangerous situation. Elias finished his letter to Davies, detailing what he knew of Whitley's activities and requesting urgent assistance. He sealed it carefully. "Isaiah will bring this with him when he comes to see your friend," Samuel said, taking the letter. "I'll send word to him tonight. He can be at your cabin by midday tomorrow." "Thank you, Samuel. I owe you." "No, Colonel, you don't." Samuel's expression was solemn. I ain't forgot what you did at Antietam, standing up for my people when that supply sergeant tried to cheat us of our rations. Or after, when you testified against those soldiers who lynched that boy in Maryland. You called it justice. I call it a debt repaid. Elias nodded, uncomfortable with the reminder of actions he considered simple decency, not heroism. As he prepared to leave, a sudden commotion outside drew their attention. Through the small kitchen window, they could see torchlight and a gathering crowd in the town square. Samuel cracked the back door open, listening. They found the stagecoach driver, he reported in a low voice. And one of the passengers remembered seeing two women matching your friend's descriptions. Whitley's moving faster than I expected, Elias muttered. I need to get back to the cabin. Take the creek trail, Samuel advised. Less chance of being seen. Elias clasped his friend's hand once more. Isaiah, tell him to approach carefully. I'm liable to shoot first and ask questions later, with things as they are. He'll come proper, Samuel assured him. God go with you, Colonel. Elias slipped out of the back door and made his way to where Thunder was tethered, keeping to the shadows. The commotion in the town square was growing louder. Whitley would use the opportunity to stoke fear, offer rewards, turn the townspeople into an extension of his search party. Mounting Thunder, Elias took the back alley out of town, then cut across country toward the creek that wound past his cabin. The night was clear, stars blazing overhead in the vast Texas sky, but Elias took no comfort in their beauty. His mind was filled with calculations, contingencies, and a growing sense that they were running out of time. He was halfway back to the cabin when he spotted the rider. A lone figure on horseback, moving parallel to his path about 100 yards to the east. In the moonlight, Elias could make out the silhouette of a man in a hat, riding with the relaxed posture of someone who knew these lands. Elias reined Thunder to a stop behind a stand of scrub oak, watching. The rider continued for a moment, then halted as well, turning his horse to face Elias's direction. There was no way the man could have seen him in the darkness, yet he seemed aware of Elias's presence. You gonna hide in them bushes all night, Colonel? A familiar voice called. Sheriff Jenkins. Elias weighed his options, then nudged Thunder forward into the open. Evening, Sheriff, he said cautiously. You're out late. Could say the same for you. Jenkins remained where he was, making no move to approach. Interesting developments in town tonight. Thought you might want to know. That's so? Senator's offering $1,000 now for them women. Got half the county ready to join a search party come morning. Elias said nothing, waiting. Funny thing, though, Jenkins continued. While the senator was making his speech, I had a chance to look through some of his papers. Man left his briefcase unattended in my office earlier. He paused. Found some mighty interesting correspondence about a business venture. Shipping enterprise, he calls it. Only the cargo ain't cotton or cattle. A faint hope stirred in Elias's chest. What are you saying, Sheriff? I'm saying maybe them women have reason to be running. Jenkins shifted in his saddle. And maybe I ain't as eager to find them as the senator thinks. Why tell me this? Because I know you, Carter. 15 years you've lived here, never caused trouble, minded your own business. Then suddenly you're lying to my face about a stagecoach robbery. Jenkins's tone held no accusation, only certainty. You've got them women somewhere, and I reckon you've got your reasons. Elias remained silent, neither confirming nor denying. Senator's men are organizing search parties. They'll start with your ranch at first light, then spread out. Jenkins tipped his hat. Just thought you should know. He turned his horse to leave, then paused. One more thing. There was a name in them papers that might interest you. Elizabeth Carter. Elias felt as if he'd been struck. What? Listed as a potential problem in a letter dated 7 years back. Jenkins's voice softened slightly. Around the time your wife and daughter died of that fever, wasn't it? The world seemed to tilt beneath Elias. Elizabeth's name in Whitley's papers 7 years ago. The implication was clear, but too horrific to fully comprehend. Think on that, Colonel, Jenkins said, and rode away into the darkness. For several minutes, Elias couldn't move. His mind reeled with the sheriff's revelation. Had Whitley been involved in Elizabeth and Emma's deaths? The fever that took them had swept through the region that summer, claiming many lives. But if Elizabeth had somehow discovered Whitley's operations, if she had become a potential problem, Thunder shifted restlessly beneath him, bringing Elias back to the present. There would be time for these questions later. Now he needed to move Abigail and Clara before the search parties arrived at dawn. He spurred Thunder toward the cabin, pushing the horse harder than before. The creek trail was treacherous in the dark, but Elias knew every turn, every crossing. They reached the cabin in record time, and Elias was relieved to see no signs of disturbance. He dismounted and approached cautiously, using the special knock they had arranged. After a moment, he heard the bolt slide back, and Abigail's face appeared in the narrow opening, the rifle visible in her hands. "Colonel," she breathed in relief, letting him in. "How is she?" Elias asked immediately, seeing Clara still on the cot. "The fever's worse," Abigail admitted. "She's been delirious, talking about her mother, about Whitley." Elias knelt beside the cot, placing a weathered hand on Clara's forehead. The heat coming off her skin confirmed Abigail's assessment. "We need to move," he said grimly. "Whitley's organizing search parties. They'll start with my ranch at dawn, then spread out. This cabin will be discovered by midday." "Move where?" Abigail asked, her composure finally showing cracks. "She can't travel far in this condition." "I know a place, an old line shack about 10 miles north in the hills. It's on Comanche land. Most white folks avoid it." Elias began gathering their supplies. "Samuel's nephew is coming to help with Clara's wound, but we can't wait for him here. I'll leave markers for him to follow." "Is there no one else who can help us?" Abigail asked as she helped pack. "The sheriff, perhaps?" Elias hesitated, then shared what Jenkins had told him, including the reference to Elizabeth. Abigail's face paled. "You think Whitley had your wife killed?" she whispered. "I don't know," Elias admitted, "but it changes things. This isn't just about helping you and Clara anymore. It's about finding the truth." They worked quickly to prepare Clara for travel. The young woman was barely conscious, murmuring incoherently as they wrapped her in blankets. Elias fashioned a travois, a simple stretcher made from branches and blankets that could be pulled behind Thunder. It was a rough method of transport, but gentler than having Clara ride. "What about the wagon?" Abigail asked as they secured Clara to the travois. "Too slow, too easy to track," Elias replied. "You'll ride the old mare. I'll lead Thunder with Clara." As they prepared to depart, a sound froze them both. Hoofbeats approaching, multiple riders by the sound. "Too soon," Elias muttered. "The search parties shouldn't be here yet." He motioned for Abigail to stay with Clara and moved to the window, peering out into the night. Through the trees, he could make out 3 riders approaching the cabin. They moved with purpose, not like men conducting a search, but like those who knew exactly where they were going. One of them separated from the others, riding closer. In the moonlight filtering through the trees, Elias could see the rider's face clearly. It was a face he knew well. Older, harder, marked by a scar that ran from eye to jaw. Nathaniel Carter, Elias's brother. Brothers by blood, strangers by choice for 15 years. Since their bitter argument after the war had severed ties that even battle couldn't break. Nathaniel, who had fought for the Confederacy while Elias commanded Union troops. Nathaniel, who had sworn never to speak to his traitor brother again. Nathaniel, who now worked for Senator Marcus Whitley. "Who is it?" Abigail whispered from behind him. "Trouble, below," Elias replied grimly, moving to the door and drawing his revolver. "My brother." The years had carved deep lines into Nathaniel Carter's face, but they hadn't diminished his presence. At 48, he carried himself with the coiled readiness of a man accustomed to violence. The scar that ran from his right eye to jaw, a parting gift from a Union cavalry saber, only enhanced his dangerous appearance. "Stay inside," Elias told Abigail, his voice low. "If shooting starts, take Clara out through the root cellar and head north." "What about you?" Abigail asked, clutching the rifle. "I'll handle my brother." Elias's tone suggested a reckoning long overdue. He stepped onto the small porch, his Colt held low at his side, not quite pointed at the approaching riders, but ready to be raised in an instant. The moonlight was bright enough to reveal faces clearly, and Elias saw the moment of recognition cross his brother's features. Nathaniel reined his horse to a halt about 20 yards from the cabin, raising his hand to signal his companions to stay back. For a long moment, the brothers simply looked at each other, measuring the changes that 15 years of estrangement had wrought. "You're looking old, Elias," Nathaniel finally called, his voice carrying the rough edge of a man who'd spent too many years shouting orders over gunfire. "You're looking employed," Elias replied evenly. "Senator Whitley must pay well." A flicker of something, perhaps amusement, perhaps grudging respect, crossed Nathaniel's scarred face. "Well enough." He dismounted with a fluid motion that belied his age, though Elias noted a slight favor to his left leg. An old injury, perhaps. "Your friends should stay back," Elias said, nodding toward the other riders. Nathaniel glanced over his shoulder. "You heard him, boys. Keep your distance." He turned back to Elias, walking forward until he stood at the foot of the cabin's 2 steps. Close enough for conversation, not so close that Elias couldn't react if he made a sudden move. "You've got something the senator wants," Nathaniel said without preamble. "2 somethings, I imagine," Elias replied, "and I don't plan on giving them up." Nathaniel sighed, removing his hat to run a hand through hair that had more gray than brown remaining. Still stubborn as a mule, I see. Some things don't change. Some things do. Elias's grip on the Colt tightened slightly, like finding my little brother working for a man like Marcus Whitley. We all serve somebody, Elias. At least Whitley pays on time. Nathaniel's tone was casual, but his eyes were watchful. The senator's offering $500 for those women. I'm authorized to offer you the same to walk away. $1,000 would fix up this place real nice. Or buy a lot of whiskey to help me sleep after selling 2 innocent women to a monster, Elias countered. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Don't lecture me about monsters, brother. Not after you wore that blue uniform and burned your way through Virginia. The old accusation hung between them like smoke after a volley. The war that had put them on opposite sides, that had turned brother against brother across a divided nation, still cast its long shadow. I didn't come here to argue about the war, Nathaniel said after a moment. That's long done. I came for the women. Then you came for nothing. Nathaniel shook his head slowly. You don't understand what you're dealing with, Elias. Whitley isn't just some corrupt politician. He's got connections all through Texas and back to Washington. Cross him, and you won't live long enough to regret it. Is that concern I hear, little brother? Elias asked with a hint of bitter amusement. After 15 years of silence? Call it professional courtesy, one soldier to another. Elias studied his brother's face, searching for the boy he'd once known beneath the hard exterior of the man before him. They had been close once, before the war tore the country and their family apart. Nathaniel had chosen the Confederacy, following their Virginia-born father's sympathies. Elias had remained loyal to the Union, honoring their late mother's New England principles. Neither had forgiven the other for the choice. The women stay with me, Elias said firmly. Nathaniel seemed unsurprised by the refusal. Then we have a problem. His hand rested casually near his holstered revolver. Because I'm not leaving without them. Tension crackled between them like heat lightning before a storm. Behind Nathaniel, his companions shifted restlessly in their saddles, hands hovering near weapons. 3 against 1, Nathaniel noted. Bad odds, even for the famous Colonel Carter. 4 against 3, came a firm female voice from the doorway. Elias didn't need to turn to know that Abigail stood there with the rifle, having ignored his instruction to stay inside. Her voice was steady, but he could hear the slight tremor of fear beneath her bravado. Nathaniel's eyes flicked to Abigail, then back to Elias. Brave girl, he commented, but I doubt she's ever shot a man. First time for everything, Abigail replied with more confidence than she felt. A tense silence fell, broken only by the soft nickering of horses and the distant call of a night bird. Elias knew they were balanced on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one nervous trigger finger, and blood would soak the ground before any more words could be spoken. Then, unexpectedly, Nathaniel chuckled, a short, harsh sound devoid of real humor. You always did attract the spirited ones, Elias. He took a step back, creating a little more distance between them. Tell you what, it's late, and I'm too old for a shootout in the dark. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. Elias frowned, suspicious of the sudden de-escalation. What's your game, Nathaniel? Instead of answering directly, Nathaniel reached slowly into his coat, telegraphing the movement to avoid appearing threatening, and withdrew a folded paper. He held it out to Elias. Take it, he said. Read it when I'm gone. Elias hesitated, then descended one step to take the paper, careful to keep his Colt ready. Dawn tomorrow. I'll be back, Nathaniel said, backing toward his horse. With more men. Think carefully about your options before then, brother. He mounted up with practiced ease and tipped his hat mockingly. Miss, he acknowledged Abigail. Pleasure making your acquaintance. With that, he wheeled his horse around and rode away, his companions falling in behind him. Elias watched until they disappeared into the darkness, then finally lowered his weapon. Inside, he ordered Abigail tersely. We need to move now. Once the door was bolted behind them, Elias unfolded the paper Nathaniel had given him. It was a note, hastily scrawled in a hand he recognized as his brother's. Not what it seems. Need to talk alone. Meet at Broken Spur Crossing, midnight tomorrow. Come alone or don't come. N. What is it? Abigail asked, trying to read over his shoulder. Elias refolded the note and tucked it into his shirt pocket. A complication, he replied. How's Clara? Burning with fever, Abigail said, her momentary boldness fading as worry reasserted itself. What did your brother mean? He'll be back at dawn with more men. Exactly what it sounds like, Elias said grimly. We need to be long gone by then. Working quickly, they prepared to move. Clara was barely conscious, murmuring incoherently as they secured her to the improvised travois. Elias left clear markers that only Samuel's nephew would recognize, signs taught to runaway slaves during the war to indicate safe routes. They set out into the night, Abigail riding the old mare, while Elias led Thunder with Clara in tow. They kept to the creek as long as possible, the water masking their tracks, before striking north toward the hills that marked the unofficial boundary of Comanche territory. Most white settlers avoided these lands out of a combination of legal uncertainty and lingering fear, despite the fact that the once mighty Comanche had been largely confined to reservations years ago. The line shack Elias had mentioned was part of an abandoned ranch whose owner had died in a raid a decade earlier. The remoteness that had once been a liability now made it an ideal sanctuary. Dawn was breaking as they reached the foothills, casting long shadows across the landscape. Elias pushed them onward, despite his own exhaustion, knowing that Nathaniel's men would already be searching the area around the cabin. The line shack, when they finally reached it, was little more than a crude shelter, 4 walls of rough-hewn logs with a sod roof and dirt floor. But it had a functional fireplace, a small spring nearby, and most importantly, it was unlikely to be discovered by casual searchers. "It's not much," Elias apologized as he carried Claire inside. "It's shelter," Abigail replied simply, echoing her words from their first arrival at his ranch. They worked together to make Clara as comfortable as possible on a bed of blankets near the fireplace. The young woman's condition had worsened during the journey, her breathing shallow, her skin alternating between burning hot and clammy cold. "She needs medicine," Abigail said, her voice tight with worry, "and clean bandages." "I know," Elias rubbed his tired eyes. "Samuel's nephew will follow our trail. Until then, we keep her cool and give her water." While Abigail tended to Clara, Elias secured the perimeter, checking sight lines and potential approaches. The shack was well positioned, with clear views in 3 directions, and the steep hillside at its back providing natural protection. When he returned inside, he found Abigail sitting beside Clara, gently bathing the girl's forehead with a damp cloth. The tenderness in the gesture reminded him painfully of Elizabeth nursing Emma through childhood illnesses. "Get some rest," he told Abigail. "I'll keep watch." "I'm not sure I could sleep," she admitted. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them coming for us." "Whitley's men?" Abigail nodded, her hands continuing their gentle ministrations. "We've been running for so long. Sometimes I wonder if we'll ever stop." Elias settled on a rough stool, his colt across his knees. "Tell me more about what Clara found, the exact nature of Whitley's operation." Abigail hesitated, then seemed to decide that full disclosure was their best option now. "It's a network, sophisticated. They identify young women, usually poor, often orphaned or otherwise vulnerable. Sometimes they're taken forcibly, like we nearly were on the road. But more often, they're recruited with promises of legitimate work. And then, they're brought to various properties Whitley owns through shell companies. Trained it, he calls it." Abigail's voice grew bitter. "Broken is more accurate. Then they're sold, officially as indentured servants or companions, but in reality as something else entirely." "To whom?" Elias pressed. "Wealthy men, politicians, businessmen, men with appetites they can't satisfy legally." Abigail's eyes met his. "Clara found ledgers with names, dates, amounts paid. Prominent names, Colonel. Men whose wives sit on charity boards while they purchase young women." The disgust in her voice matched the churning in Elias's stomach. He'd seen the darkness men were capable of during the war, had commanded men who committed atrocities in the name of victory. But this was a different kind of evil. Calculated, hidden behind respectability, feeding on the most vulnerable. "And you're certain Whitley is at the center of it all?" he asked. "Absolutely certain. Clara saw his signature on documents, heard him giving orders." Abigail's voice dropped lower. "And she believes her mother was one of his victims, a housemaid he used, then discarded when she became pregnant. The family who adopted Clara never told her the truth, but she found letters after her adoptive father died. That explained the personal nature of Clara's crusade against Whitley. Not just justice for others, but vengeance for her mother's suffering. If what Sheriff Jenkins hinted is true," Elias said slowly, "then Whitley may have had my wife killed for discovering his operation. Elizabeth was involved in a charity that helped young women find employment in San Antonio. If she encountered one of his victims, recognized what was happening, the possibility hung in the air between them, too terrible to fully articulate. The thought that Elizabeth and Emma might have died not from natural causes, but from Whitley's deliberate action kindled a rage in Elias that he had not felt since the darkest days of the war. "Colonel," Abigail said hesitantly, "your brother, what did his note say?" Elias had almost forgotten the folded paper in his pocket. He withdrew it, but didn't offer it to Abigail. He wants to meet, alone, claims things aren't what they seem. Do you trust him? No, Elias replied honestly, but I know him. Whatever else Nathaniel has become, he wouldn't waste time with deception if he could achieve his goal through force. The fact that he passed me a secret note suggests something more complicated is at play. It could be a trap, Abigail pointed out. Could be, Elias agreed, but I need to know why he's working for Whitley and what he knows about Elizabeth's death. The day passed with agonizing slowness. Elias took turns with Abigail watching over Clara, whose condition stabilized but didn't improve. By mid-afternoon, there was still no sign of Samuel's nephew, and Elias began to fear that the young man had been intercepted or had been unable to follow their trail. Tell me about yourself, Elias said to Abigail during one of their watches, partly to pass the time, partly because he realized how little he knew about this woman who had shown such courage. Abigail seemed surprised by the personal question, but answered readily enough. I grew up in Pennsylvania. My father was a teacher, my mother a midwife. They believed in education for all, radical ideas before the war. A small smile touched her lips. They taught at a school for freed slaves even when it was dangerous to do so. That's where you got your convictions, Elias observed. Yes, they died in a fire when I was 16, arson, though it was never proven. I finished my education with help from their friends, then became a teacher myself. Her expression darkened. I thought I was making a difference at that girls' school in Virginia, until Clara showed me what was happening to some of our graduates who went to work for Whitley's associates. You are making a difference, Elias said quietly. Most would have looked away, protected themselves. Abigail shook her head. I couldn't live with myself if I'd done that. They lapsed into silence, the only sounds Clara's labored breathing and the occasional call of birds outside. Elias found himself studying Abigail's profile as she tended to Clara. The determination in her jaw, the intelligence in her eyes, the strand of dark hair that had escaped her bun to curl against her neck. She was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with conventional standards and everything to do with the fire that burned within her. The realization unsettled him. At 58, he had considered that part of his life long over, buried with Elizabeth. Yet here was this remarkable young woman who stirred something in him he'd thought dead. Not just physical attraction, but admiration, respect, a desire to protect that went beyond mere duty. Elias pushed the thoughts away, focusing instead on the tactical situation. If Samuel's nephew didn't arrive by nightfall, he would need to seek other medical help for Clara. And there was still the matter of Nathaniel's proposed meeting at midnight. Late in the afternoon, as shadows lengthened across the hills, a sound outside brought Elias instantly alert. He motioned for Abigail to move away from the windows, positioning himself beside the door with his Colt drawn. The approach was cautious, a single horse moving slowly, its rider making no attempt at stealth. Still Elias waited, listening intently as the rider dismounted and approached the shack on foot. A specific pattern of knocks came at the door. 2, pause, 3, pause, 1. The signal Samuel had described. Colonel Carter? A young man's voice called softly. My Uncle Samuel sent me. Isaiah Wells. Elias opened the door, revealing a slender young black man in his mid-20s, carrying a leather medical bag. The family resemblance to Samuel was evident in his features, though Isaiah lacked his uncle's powerful build. Thank God, Abigail breathed, rushing forward. Please, our friend is very ill. Isaiah moved immediately to Clara's side, his manner shifting from cautious visitor to professional healer in an instant. He examined the wound carefully, his expression growing serious. Infection has set in, he said. I'll need to clean the wound properly, then apply a poultice. I've brought medicines, but she'll need constant care for the next day at least. Can you save her? Abigail asked, her voice tight with worry. Isaiah met her gaze directly. I'll do everything I can, but she's very weak. He opened his bag, revealing an array of medical supplies that impressed even Elias, who had seen field hospitals during the war. Isaiah worked with practiced efficiency, cleaning the wound thoroughly before applying a mixture of herbs and powders that he explained would draw out the infection. While he worked, he spoke in a low voice, conveying information from his uncle. There are search parties all over the county. The senator has men watching every road, and he's convinced the sheriff to deputize additional men. They searched your ranch thoroughly, Colonel, then the cabin by the creek. Any word on Marshal Davies? Elias asked. Uncle Samuel sent your letter on the morning stage, but it will be at least 3 days before any help could arrive from Austin. Isaiah glanced up from his work. And there's more. The senator has publicly accused Miss Moore of murdering the headmistress back in Virginia. There's talk of a telegram from Richmond confirming an arrest warrant. Abigail paled but didn't seem surprised. Whitley's closing the net, she said. Indeed, Isaiah agreed, returning to his ministrations. Uncle Samuel said to tell you that Sheriff Jenkins is walking a fine line, pretending to cooperate with the senator while quietly obstructing where he can. But his position is precarious. Elias absorbed this information grimly. The situation was deteriorating faster than he'd anticipated. Even if Clara recovered enough to travel, they were effectively trapped, with Whitley's men blocking all escape routes and legal authorities potentially hunting Abigail as a murderess. Did your uncle mention anything about my brother? Elias asked. Isaiah nodded. Nathaniel Carter is leading one of the search parties. He's been very visible in town, offering additional rewards from his own pocket. The young man hesitated. But Uncle Samuel thinks it's an act. Said your brother was asking strange questions about the senator when no one else was around. That aligned with Nathaniel's cryptic note. Perhaps his brother was playing a deeper game than was immediately apparent. I need to meet with him, Elias decided aloud. Tonight. Colonel, no, Abigail protested. It's too dangerous. Staying here without information is more dangerous, Elias countered. If Nathaniel knows something about Whitley's operations, or about Elizabeth's death, I need to hear it. Isaiah finished bandaging Clara's wound and administered a tonic that he promised would help reduce her fever. I'll stay with her through the night, he offered. Uncle Samuel thought you might need to move about, so he sent me with provisions for several days. Elias clasped the young man's shoulder gratefully. You're taking a significant risk, Isaiah. Whitley wouldn't look kindly on anyone helping us. Uncle Samuel saved my father during the war, Isaiah replied simply. Our family pays its debts. As dusk settled over the hills, Elias prepared for his midnight meeting. He checked and rechecked his Colt, strapped on a knife he hadn't carried in years, and studied the crude maps Samuel had drawn of the area, memorizing alternate routes back to the line shack in case he needed to evade pursuit. I still think this is a mistake, Abigail said as she watched him prepare. Your brother works for Whitley. Whatever he claims, his loyalty is clear. Nathaniel's loyalty has always been to himself first, Elias replied. If he's reaching out now, it's because he sees advantage in it. I need to find out what that advantage might be. And if it's a trap, then I'll deal with it. Elias buckled on his gun belt with practiced ease. I wasn't always a rancher, Miss Moore. Big L, she corrected him. After all we've been through, I think you can use my given name. Elias nodded, unexpectedly moved by the simple intimacy of the permission. Abigail, then. I'll return by dawn. If I don't, take Isaiah and Clara and head west toward the Pecos. Samuel has contacts among the Mexican communities there who might help you cross the border. I won't leave you behind, she said firmly. You will if it means saving Clara's life, Elias countered, his tone brooking no argument. Promise me. Abigail held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded reluctantly. I promise. But you'd better return, Colonel Carter. Elias, he responded with a hint of a smile. After all we've been through, I think you can use my given name. The brief moment of warmth faded as he stepped toward the door, the weight of the mission ahead settling on his shoulders. Bar the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me, and only if I give the correct knock. Outside, the night was clear and cold, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet darkness. Elias mounted Thunder and set out for Broken Spur Crossing, a ford across the creek, about 5 miles from the line shack. It had once been part of a cattle trail before the railroad changed the patterns of commerce in the region. He rode cautiously, alert for any sign of ambush or pursuit. The terrain was rough, largely unexplored by white settlers, which made it both challenging to navigate and unlikely to be watched by Whitley's men. It was nearly midnight when Elias reached the crossing, dismounting in a stand of cottonwoods that offered concealment. He ground-tied Thunder and proceeded on foot, moving silently through the underbrush until he had a clear view of the ford. Moonlight silvered the shallow water flowing over the rocks, creating an almost peaceful scene. There was no sign of Nathaniel or anyone else. Elias settled into a watching position, his Colt drawn, prepared to wait. Minutes stretched into a quarter hour, then half an hour. Still no sign of his brother. Had it been a ruse after all? A way to separate him from Abigail and Clara, leaving them vulnerable? Or had Nathaniel been prevented from coming? Just as Elias was preparing to withdraw, a figure emerged from the shadows on the opposite bank. Nathaniel moved cautiously into the moonlight, clearly visible and apparently alone. He carried no rifle, though Elias had no doubt his brother was armed with at least a sidearm. I know you're there, Elias, Nathaniel called softly. I came alone, as promised. Elias hesitated, then stepped from his concealment, keeping his Colt ready. You're late. Had trouble shaking my companions, Nathaniel replied. Whitley's men don't trust easily. With good reason. The brothers regarded each other across the shallow water, each wary, each measuring the other's intentions. You going to stand there all night, or can we talk? Nathaniel finally asked. Talk, Elias said, making no move to cross the creek. Nathaniel sighed, then stepped into the water, crossing the ford until he stood about 10 feet from Elias. Close enough for conversation. Far enough that neither could make a sudden move without the other reacting. You're in more trouble than you know, brother, Nathaniel began. Whitley isn't just some corrupt politician. He's connected to people in Washington. Powerful people who use his services. You mean his trafficking operation? Elias said bluntly. Nathaniel didn't deny it. Among other enterprises. The point is, he can bring resources to bear that you can't imagine. There are a dozen hired guns in Redemption now, with more coming. He's got the telegraph office watching for messages, the stagecoach company checking passengers. Rewards posted at every crossroads from here to San Antonio. If you're trying to convince me to give up the women, you're wasting your breath, Elias said. I'm trying to save your life, Nathaniel shot back, a flash of genuine emotion breaking through his controlled exterior. Whitley doesn't just want the women anymore. He wants you dead. Specifically dead, not captured. He's offering $1,000 for proof of your demise. This was unexpected. Why the personal vendetta? Because of who you were. A decorated Union colonel turning against him? Making accusations? That's dangerous to a man with political aspirations. Better to eliminate the threat entirely. Elias absorbed this information, studying his brother's face for any sign of deception. Why are you telling me this, Nathaniel? Last I checked, you hated me almost as much as you hated the Union. Nathaniel's expression tightened, the scar on his cheek standing out starkly in the moonlight. I never hated you, Elias. I hated what you represented, what you fought for. He paused. But you're still my blood, and I've seen what Whitley does to those who cross him. Even you don't deserve that. How touching, Elias said dryly. And it has nothing to do with the fact that Clara Dawson is Whitley's illegitimate daughter, carrying evidence that could destroy him? Nathaniel's surprise was genuine. How did you... He stopped himself, reassessing. You're more informed than I realized. Not informed enough, Elias countered. Did Whitley have Elizabeth and Emma killed? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Nathaniel's expression shifted, a brief flash of what might have been pity crossing his features. Yes, he said simply. Elizabeth was helping one of his girls who escaped. She didn't know what she was involved in. Not really, but she was asking questions, making connections. Whitley couldn't risk it. The confirmation hit Elias like a physical blow. He had suspected, feared, but hearing it stated so baldly made it real in a way that theory had not been. Elizabeth and Emma, his family, murdered on Whitley's orders. The fever was real, Nathaniel continued, his voice almost gentle. But they were poisoned first, to weaken them, made to look like they simply couldn't fight off the illness that was already sweeping through the area. How do you know this? Elias demanded, his voice rough with contained emotion. Because I was already working for him, even then. Not directly, through intermediaries. I didn't know the target was your family. Not until after. Nathaniel's gaze didn't waver. I've carried that knowledge for 7 years, Elias. Rage surged through Elias, white-hot and consuming. His finger tightened on the trigger of his Colt. You knew. All this time you knew Elizabeth and Emma were murdered, and you said nothing. Did nothing. What would you have done in my place? Nathaniel challenged. Whitley was already powerful, even then. Connected. Protected. Coming after him would have been suicide. Yes, so you continued working for him instead, for the man who killed my family, your own flesh and blood. I did what I had to survive, Nathaniel replied, a defensive edge entering his voice. The war left me with nothing, Elias. No home, no prospects, just a reputation as a good man with a gun. He gestured to the scar on his face, and a permanent reminder of Union justice. Don't you dare blame the war for what you've become, Elias growled. Plenty of men on both sides found their way back to decency. And plenty didn't, Nathaniel shot back. You think you're so righteous? You walked away, buried yourself on this godforsaken ranch, while men like Whitley built empires on the backs of the vulnerable. Your silence enabled him as much as my service. The accusation struck uncomfortably close to home. Elias had withdrawn from the world after Elizabeth and Emma died, seeking solace in isolation rather than justice or engagement. Had his retreat enabled Whitley's rise? Had other families suffered because he had chosen peace over confrontation? Why come to me now? Elias asked, pushing aside the uncomfortable self-reflection. After all these years? Nathaniel hesitated, then reached slowly into his coat, drawing out a folded document. Because of this, I found it among Whitley's papers, a list of people he considers threats, people to be eliminated if they ever become problematic. Your name is on it, has been for years. But recently he added another name next to yours. He held out the paper, and Elias took it cautiously, unfolding it while keeping his Colt trained on his brother. By the moonlight he could make out a list of names, many crossed out. His own was there, as Nathaniel had said, and beside it, recently added in a different ink, Nathaniel Carter, knows too much, liability after E. Carter operation. Elias looked up sharply. He plans to kill you, too. Once I've outlived my usefulness in finding you and the women, yes. Nathaniel's mouth twisted in a bitter smile. Honor among thieves and all that. So this is self-preservation, Elias said, understanding dawning. You're helping me to save yourself. Partly, Nathaniel admitted, but not entirely. He took a deep breath. I'm tired, Elias. Tired of what I've become. Tired of serving men like Whitley. Maybe it's too late for redemption, but I can at least try to make one thing right. Elias studied his brother, searching for deception and finding instead a weariness that matched his own. The years had been hard on Nathaniel, carving deep lines of regret alongside those of experience. What are you proposing? Elias asked finally. An alliance, Nathaniel said. Temporary, if you prefer. I have information about Whitley's operations. Names, dates, locations. Things even your Miss Dawson doesn't know. Combined with whatever evidence she has, it might be enough to bring him down. And in exchange, your help in disappearing afterward. Whitley has a long reach and longer memory. If he survives, I'm a dead man. It was a pragmatic offer, not an emotional reconciliation. Yet Elias couldn't help feeling the pull of their shared blood. The echo of the brotherhood that had once bound them before war and circumstance drove them apart. How do I know this isn't an elaborate trap? He asked. You don't, Nathaniel replied honestly. But consider this. If I wanted you dead, I could have brought Whitley's men with me tonight, or simply shot you from across the creek before revealing myself. It was true and consistent with the direct approach Nathaniel had always preferred. Still, Elias was cautious. I'll need more than your word. Nathaniel nodded, as if expecting this. 2 of Whitley's men are planning to raid the line shack at dawn. They discovered it earlier today while searching the hills. I'm supposed to lead them there. Elias tensed. Abigail and Clara, we'll be fine if we act now. Nathaniel cut him off. I can lead the raid in the wrong direction, but that's only a temporary solution. Whitley's bringing in trackers from San Antonio who won't be so easily fooled. We need to move them, Elias said, his mind already racing through options. No, Nathaniel countered. That's exactly what Whitley expects. He's got men watching every road, every trail. Moving them now would be walking into his hands. Then what do you suggest? We change the game, Nathaniel said, a dangerous gleam entering his eyes. Strike at Whitley directly where he least expects it. The evidence against him is stored in a safe in his hotel room in Redemption. Correspondence, ledgers, a book of contacts, everything needed to destroy him. You expect us to break into a hotel room guarded by Whitley's men? Elias asked incredulously. No, I expect us to create a diversion significant enough that the room will be temporarily unguarded. Nathaniel's expression was grimly determined. A fire, perhaps, in the livery stable next to the hotel. You're talking about arson, Elias said flatly, risking innocent lives. I'm talking about war, brother, the kind of decisive action you were once known for. Nathaniel's tone was challenging. Or have you forgotten what it means to command? The accusation stung, but Elias refused to be provoked. There must be another way. There isn't, not with the time we have. Nathaniel glanced at the sky where the moon had begun its descent. Dawn is coming. I need your answer. Elias weighed his options carefully. Working with Nathaniel was a risk. His brother was unpredictable, potentially untrustworthy. But the information he offered was valuable, perhaps essential to protecting Abigail and Clara and bringing Whitley to justice. And there was the matter of Elizabeth and Emma. Their deaths, confirmed now as murder rather than misfortune, demanded a response. Not vengeance. Elias had seen too much of war's horrors to believe in the cleansing power of blood. But justice, the kind of justice that had once been his calling, before grief drove him into isolation. No arson, he said finally, but I'll work with you to get the evidence. On one condition. Name it, Nathaniel replied. When this is over, when Whitley is exposed, you'll testify about Elizabeth and Emma's deaths. Officially, under oath. Nathaniel hesitated, clearly weighing the personal risk such a commitment would entail. Finally, he nodded. Agreed, but only if Whitley is actually in custody. I won't commit suicide by confession if he remains free to retaliate. Fair enough, Elias conceded. Now, what's your plan for tomorrow's raid? As the brothers talked, outlining strategies and contingencies, dawn approached inexorably. The alliance was fragile, built on shared blood, but tempered by years of estrangement and opposing loyalties. Yet in that moment, under the fading stars, they found common purpose in a way that had eluded them since before the war tore their country and their family apart. Neither noticed the figure watching from the distant ridge, nor the glint of moonlight on the brass telescope through which they were observed. Senator Marcus Whitley lowered the instrument slowly, his aristocratic features arranged in an expression of cold calculation. Interesting, he murmured to the man standing silently beside him. It seems our Mr. Carter has divided loyalties after all. Want me to take the shot, Senator? The man asked, patting the rifle slung across his back. I could drop both of them from here. Whitley considered the offer, then shook his head. No, Mr. Rhodes, I believe this development offers opportunities. Let them plot. Let them think they've formed an alliance. A thin smile crossed his face. It will make their eventual betrayal of each other all the more satisfying. He turned his horse, gesturing for his companion to follow. Return to town. Tell no one what we've seen, but have 4 men ready to move on my order. And the women at the line shack? Leave them for now. They're the bait in our trap. Whitley's expression hardened. But send word to our associates in Austin. It's time to deal with Marshal Davies before the good colonel's message reaches him. As they rode away, Whitley cast one last glance over his shoulder at the 2 brothers, still deep in conversation by the creek crossing. His face betrayed no emotion, only the patience of a predator who knows his prey has nowhere to run. Dawn painted the eastern sky in bands of gold and crimson as Elias made his way back to the line shack. The meeting with Nathaniel had left him both hopeful and troubled. Hopeful that they now had a potential ally with inside knowledge, troubled by the confirmation of Elizabeth and Emma's murders. Every assumption he'd made about their deaths, every measure of peace he'd managed to find in the 7 years since, had been built on a foundation of lies. They hadn't simply fallen victim to the fever that swept through the region that summer. They had been deliberately targeted, poisoned to weaken them before the illness could take hold. And the man responsible, Marcus Whitley, had continued his rise to power unchecked, leaving a trail of similar victims in his wake. The rage Elias felt was cold, focused, almost comforting in its clarity. He had spent too many years drowning in grief, seeking solace in isolation. Now he had purpose again. Not just protecting Abigail and Clara, but bringing Whitley to justice for all his crimes, including the murders of Elizabeth and Emma. As the line shack came into view, Elias slowed Thunder to a walk, canning the surrounding hills for any sign of threat. Finding none, he approached cautiously, giving the agreed-upon signal, 3 short whistles in the pattern of a meadowlark's call. After a moment, the door opened and Abigail appeared, rifle in hand. The relief on her face when she saw him was quickly masked by concern. "You look terrible," she said as he dismounted stiffly, his body protesting the long night without rest. "I've looked worse," he replied, leading Thunder to the lean-to where the other horses were tethered. Inside, the line shack was warmer than he expected, a small fire burning in the crude fireplace. Isaiah Wells sat beside Clara, checking her pulse, while the young woman herself appeared to be sleeping more peacefully than before. "Her fever broke about 2 hours ago," Isaiah reported quietly. "The infection is responding to the medicines. She's still weak, but I believe the worst has passed." "Thank God," Abigail breathed, the tension she'd been carrying visibly easing from her shoulders. Elias nodded his gratitude to the young doctor, then accepted the cup of coffee Abigail pressed into his hands. The brew was bitter and strong, exactly what he needed after the night's exertions. "What happened with your brother?" Abigail asked, keeping her voice low to avoid disturbing Clara. Elias took a long swallow of coffee before answering. "It's complicated, but he's offered to help us." "Help us?" Abigail's skepticism was evident. "The man works for Whitley, and Whitley plans to kill him once he's outlived his usefulness." Elias set down the cup and briefly outlined his conversation with Nathaniel, including the revelation about Elizabeth and Emma's deaths. He kept his voice steady through the recounting, though the pain was still raw. Abigail listened with growing horror, her hand moving unconsciously to cover her mouth when he described how his family had been murdered. "Colonel Elias, I'm so sorry," she said when he finished. "To learn this after all these years. It changes things," he said simply. "What I believed was a tragedy was actually murder. Whitley has much to answer for." "Do you trust your brother?" Isaiah asked, joining the conversation. "A man willing to work for someone like Whitley." "Trust is a strong word," Elias replied. "Let's say I believe his self-interest now aligns with ours, and he has information we need." He explained Nathaniel's proposal to use the planned raid on the line shack as a diversion while they accessed Whitley's private papers in redemption. It's risky, Abigail observed, if Nathaniel betrays us or if Whitley anticipates the move. Well, everything is risky at this point, Elias countered. Whitley controls the town, the telegraph, the roads. We can't stay hidden forever, and we can't outrun him without help. Isaiah cleared his throat. My uncle sent a message with me for just such a situation, he said, reaching into his jacket to withdraw a sealed envelope. He said to give it to you if you decided to make a move against Whitley directly. Curious, Elias opened the envelope. Inside was a roughly drawn map and a short note in Samuel's distinctive handwriting. Colonel, if you're reading this, you've chosen to fight rather than run. The map shows a tunnel under the Grand Hotel built during Redemption's wilder days when certain businessmen needed discreet access to the saloon. The entrance is in the old storeroom behind the smithy. Few remember it exists. May provide alternate approach. Samuel Elias studied the map carefully. Samuel had marked the tunnel's route from the smithy to the hotel basement, with notations about structural integrity and potential hazards. This changes things, he said, showing the map to Abigail and Isaiah. We might not need Nathaniel's distraction after all. Unless it's a trap, Abigail pointed out, or the tunnel has collapsed after all these years. Samuel wouldn't send us into danger knowingly, Elias said, but you're right to be cautious. I'll need to verify the tunnel's condition before we commit to using it. We? Abigail raised an eyebrow. You intend for me to accompany you? I can't leave you and Clara here unprotected, Elias explained. Nathaniel is supposed to misdirect today's raid, but there's no guarantee other search parties won't find this place. We need to move together. Clara isn't strong enough for travel, Isaiah interjected. Even with the fever broken, she needs rest. Then we bring her to Samuel's, Elias decided. His home has a cellar where she can recover safely while we deal with Whitley. And what exactly is the plan for dealing with Whitley? Abigail asked. Elias's expression hardened. We get the evidence from his room. Then we use Samuel's connections to get a message to Marshal Davies bypassing the controlled telegraph office. Once Davies has the evidence, he can arrest Whitley properly. That's surprisingly lawful, Abigail commented, a hint of dry humor in her voice. I half expected you to suggest shooting him. Killing Whitley would be satisfying, Elias admitted, but it wouldn't end his operation or bring his associates to justice. For that, we need the law on our side. The discussion was interrupted by a soft moan from Clara's makeshift bed. The young woman's eyes fluttered open, more lucid than they had been since the fever took hold. Colonel Carter? She called weakly. Elias moved to her side, kneeling beside the pallet. I'm here, Miss Dawson. How are you feeling? Like I've been trampled by horses, she replied with a ghost of a smile. But alive, thanks to you all. Abigail joined them, taking Clara's hand. You gave us quite a scare. Clara's gaze moved between them, noting their grave expressions. What's happened? Has he found us? Elias exchanged a glance with Abigail, who nodded slightly. Clara deserved the truth. We've confirmed what you suspected about Whitley, he said gently. His trafficking operation, his political connections, and more. He told her about Nathaniel's revelations, including the murder of his family. Clara listened with growing distress, tears welling in her eyes. I'm so sorry, she whispered when he finished. Your wife and daughter. Because of him. Because of my father. The word hung in the air between them. Clara had never explicitly confirmed her relationship to Whitley before, though Elias had pieced it together. He's your biological father, Elias said. But that doesn't make you responsible for his actions. Doesn't it? Clara's voice was bitter. His blood runs in my veins. The same capacity for evil. No, Elias cut her off firmly. Evil isn't inherited, Clara. It's chosen. Whitley chose his path just as you've chosen yours, to stand against him, at great personal risk. Clara seemed to take some comfort in his words, though doubt still shadowed her eyes. What happens now? She asked. Now we take the fight to him, Elias said, standing. But first, we need to move you somewhere safer. While Abigail and Isaiah prepared Clara for travel, Elias stepped outside to survey their surroundings once more. The morning was advancing, the sun climbing higher in a cloudless sky. Under different circumstances, he might have appreciated the beauty of the rugged landscape, the distant hills shimmering in the heat, the scattered oaks and cottonwoods providing islands of shade in the vast expanse. Instead, he saw only tactical considerations, limited cover, too many open approaches, the difficulty of moving an injured woman across exposed terrain without being spotted. He was calculating their best route when a flicker of movement caught his eye, a momentary flash of light from a distant ridge, there and gone so quickly he might have imagined it. But Elias's instincts, honed by years of warfare, told him otherwise. Sunlight reflecting off glass, a spyglass or rifle scope. They were being watched. Elias retreated into the shack casually, giving no outward sign of alarm. Inside, he signaled for silence, then whispered his suspicions to the others. "How long have they been there?" Abigail asked, her voice barely audible. "Unknown, but if they wanted to attack directly, they would have already. They're watching, waiting." "For what?" Isaiah asked. "For us to lead them to evidence, perhaps." Elias's mind raced through possibilities. Or they're coordinating with other forces. Either way, their planned departure was now compromised. They needed a new strategy. "Is there another way out of here?" Elias asked Isaiah. "Something not visible from that ridge?" The young man thought for a moment. "There's a ravine about 100 yards behind the shack. It runs east for nearly a mile before joining a larger wash. Steep sides would provide cover." "Good. We'll leave that way, but not altogether." Elias outlined his plan quickly. "Isaiah, you and Clara go first. Head for your uncle's place, but take a circuitous route. Abigail and I will create a diversion, make it look like we're headed north with Clara, then double back later." "Split up?" Abigail didn't look convinced. "Is that wise?" "It's necessary," Elias said. "Clara needs medical care more than protection right now, and whoever's watching is more likely to follow us, assuming we have the evidence they want." There was no time for extended debate. Working quickly, they gathered their meager supplies and prepared Clara for travel. The young woman was weak but determined, insisting she could manage with Isaiah's support. "Remember," Elias told Isaiah as they prepared to leave, "stay in the ravine as long as possible. If you encounter anyone, Clara is your sister, ill with summer fever. You're taking her to a doctor in Redemption." Isaiah nodded, his expression solemn. "We'll make it, Colonel. Uncle Samuel's place has hiding spots the senator's men will never find." Elias clasped the young man's shoulder. "God go with you both." As Isaiah helped Clara through the back window and into the ravine beyond, Elias and Abigail prepared their diversion. They gathered blankets to create a bundle that, from a distance, might be mistaken for a person. Securing it to Thunder's saddle, they added Clara's shawl as a final touch. "Ready?" Elias asked, checking his colt one final time. Abigail nodded, though her eyes betrayed her fear. "As I'll ever be." They exited the front of the shack boldly, making no attempt at concealment. Elias helped Abigail mount the old mare, then secured the bundle to Thunder's back before mounting up himself. With deliberate casualness, they set off northward, away from both Redemption and the distant ridge where the Watcher lurked. For nearly an hour, they maintained the ruse, riding steadily through increasingly rough terrain. Elias kept alert, noting with grim satisfaction that they were indeed being followed. Two riders keeping pace at a distance, just visible occasionally when the land dipped. "They're still with us," he told Abigail, as they paused in the shadow of a rocky outcropping. "Good. That means Isaiah and Clara likely got away clean." "What now?" Abigail asked, taking a sip from her canteen. "Now we lose our shadows and circle back toward Redemption." Elias studied the landscape ahead. "There's a box canyon about a mile from here. Perfect place for an ambush, which means they'll be expecting one." "So we avoid it?" "No, we ride straight into it, but prepared for what comes next." Abigail raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" Elias pointed to a narrow trail visible winding up the canyon wall. "That leads to a plateau above. Cattle drovers use it during roundup. Our followers may not know it exists." Understanding dawned on Abigail's face. "We let them think they've trapped us, then slip away." "Exactly." Elias remounted Thunder. "Stay close to me, and when I give the signal, be ready to ride hard." They continued north, deliberately taking a path that would be easily followed. As the box canyon came into view, Elias noted with satisfaction that their pursuers had closed the distance slightly, growing more confident as their quarry approached the natural trap. The canyon itself was impressive, sheer rock walls rising over 100 feet on three sides, with only the narrow entrance they now approached. A perfect place for an ambush, as countless cattle rustlers had discovered over the years. "They're moving to cut us off," Abigail murmured, glancing back. Indeed, their shadows had split up, one continuing directly behind, while the other angled to the east, attempting to reach the canyon entrance first and complete the trap. "Good," Elias said. "Means they're committed to their plan." They rode into the canyon at an unhurried pace, as if unaware of the danger closing in behind them. The rock walls rose steeply on either side, casting long shadows across the sandy floor. About halfway in, Elias guided them toward the western wall, where the hidden trail began. "When we reach that cluster of boulders," he told Abigail quietly, "be ready. We'll abandon the bundle, then make for the trail. It's steep and narrow, so follow exactly where I lead." Abigail nodded, her face set with determination. As they approached the designated point, a shout echoed from the canyon entrance behind them. "That's far enough, Carter." Elias glanced back to see the two riders blocking their exit, rifles raised. Both wore the dusty clothes of professional manhunters, their faces hard and weathered beneath the brims of their hats. "Seems we have company," Elias observed mildly, slowing Thunder to a stop. "Hand over the girl and the papers," one of the men called. "Senator Whitley's offering a fair price." "That so?" Elias shifted slightly, positioning himself to shield Abigail. "And if we decline?" "Then we take them anyway," the second man replied, "along with your scalps." Elias appeared to consider this, using the moment to survey their position. They were within 10 yards of the hidden trail, partially concealed from their pursuers by the boulders Elias had identified earlier. "Well, when you put it that way," he called back, then abruptly wheeled Thunder around, shouting to Abigail, "Now!" In one fluid motion, he drew his Colt and fired two rapid shots toward their pursuers, not aiming to hit, but forcing them to duck for cover. Simultaneously, he cut loose the bundle from Thunder's back, leaving it to fall to the canyon floor. Abigail urged her mount forward, following Elias as he led the way to the narrow trail that snaked up the canyon wall. The path was barely visible, a natural formation enhanced by generations of cattle drovers seeking shortcuts during roundup. Behind them, confusion reigned briefly as the manhunters processed what was happening. Then rifle fire erupted, bullets ricocheting off the rocks around them as they began their ascent. "Keep low," Elias ordered, hunching over Thunder's neck as they climbed. The trail was treacherous, barely wide enough for a horse, with a sheer drop on one side and the canyon wall on the other. Their mounts scrambled for purchase on the loose shale, sending small cascades of stone tumbling into the canyon below. More shots rang out, but their pursuers were firing uphill at moving targets partially concealed by the terrain. Still, one bullet came close enough that Elias felt its passage disturb the air near his cheek. "They're following," Abigail called, glancing back. Indeed, one of the manhunters had discovered the trail and was beginning his own ascent, rifle slung across his back as he focused on the difficult climb. "We need to reach the top first," Elias said grimly. "Once on the plateau, we can outdistance them." The climb seemed endless, each twist in the trail bringing new challenges. A fallen boulder narrowing the already precarious path, a section washed out by previous rains, requiring a dangerous leap. But finally, mercifully, they crested the rim and emerged onto the flat expanse of the plateau above. Without pausing to rest, Elias led them east, away from Redemption initially to throw off any additional pursuers who might be watching, before they would loop back toward town. They rode hard for nearly a mile before Elias deemed it safe to slow their pace. "We lost them?" Abigail asked, her face flushed from the exertion and danger. "For now," Elias confirmed. "But they'll keep searching. Whitley's offering too much money for them to give up easily." Abigail pushed a strand of hair from her face, her expression troubled. "What if they find Isaiah and Clara? Isaiah knows these lands. He'll keep her safe." Elias hoped his confidence was justified. "Our job now is to get to Redemption and find that evidence." They traveled for several more hours, taking a circuitous route that kept them away from main trails and settled areas. The sun climbed to its zenith, then began its slow descent westward, casting long shadows as afternoon waned. It was nearing dusk when they finally approached Redemption from the east, staying within the cover of a stand of cottonwoods that lined the creek running past the town. From this vantage point, Elias could see the main street clearly, the saloon doing brisk business, the general store closing for the evening, and the Grand Hotel standing prominently at the center of town. "Whitley's men will be watching all approaches," he told Abigail, as they secured their horses in a secluded spot. "We'll wait for full dark, then make our way to Samuel's smithy. And if your brother betrayed us, if they're waiting there too, then we'll know quickly enough," Elias replied grimly. "But I don't think he did. Nathaniel may be many things, but he's never been one for subtlety or patience. If he meant to trap us, he'd have done so at the creek crossing." As darkness fell, they made their way cautiously toward town, staying to the shadows and avoiding the pools of light cast by the few street lamps. Redemption was still active despite the hour. Music and raucous laughter spilled from the saloon, and occasional groups of men moved between the businesses still open for evening trade. Elias led them behind the row of buildings that made up the main street, using the alleyways and service passages familiar to anyone who had lived in the area for years. The smithy stood at the edge of town, its forge cold at this hour, the attached house showing only a single light in a back window. They approached from the rear, where a small stable housed Samuel's horse and those waiting for the blacksmith's attention. Elias used the special knock they had arranged, 2 quick raps, a pause, then 3 more. For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then the door opened a crack and Samuel's face appeared, relief evident when he recognized his visitors. Colonel Miss Moore, he greeted them quietly, ushering them inside, was beginning to worry. The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee and cornbread, a welcome change from the sparse conditions of the line shack. Clara lay on a narrow bed in the corner, pale but alert, while Isaiah sat nearby, monitoring her condition. "You made it," Abigail breathed, hurrying to Clara's side. "Thanks to Isaiah," Clara said weakly. "He got us here just before a search party passed nearby." Samuel closed and locked the door behind them, then drew the curtains tightly. "Town's crawling with Whitley's men," he reported. "Senators offering $2,000 now for information leading to your capture, dead or alive." "The price keeps rising," Elias observed dryly, accepting the cup of coffee Samuel offered. "That tunnel you mentioned, is it still passable?" "Checked it myself this afternoon. Tight in places where the supports have weakened but passable." Samuel rolled out the crude map on his kitchen table. "Leads directly to the hotel basement. From there, service stairs will take you up to the guest floors." "Whitley's in room 12, Isaiah added. "Second floor, east side. Window overlooks the main street." "You've been busy," Elias commented, impressed by the brothers' initiative. "Seemed prudent to gather information while waiting," Samuel replied with a slight smile. "Isaiah's been playing the role of curious medical student, asking questions all over town. No one suspects a Negro boy of being connected to you." Isaiah nodded. "The senator has 4 men guarding the hotel, 2 in the lobby, 2 patrolling the halls. They change shifts at midnight." "What about Sheriff Jenkins?" Elias asked. "Where does he stand in all this?" "Walking a fine line," Samuel said, "pretending to cooperate with Whitley while quietly obstructing where he can." He started questioning the senator's story about Miss Moore being wanted for murder, asking to see the official papers from Virginia. That was encouraging. If Jenkins was developing doubts about Whitley's claims, he might be a potential ally when the moment came to act. "And Nathaniel?" Elias asked. Samuel's expression darkened slightly. "Your brother's been leading search parties all day, making quite a show of his determination to find you. But he's consistently led them away from where you actually were. Could be coincidence. Or strategy," Elias finished. "He's playing a complicated game." They gathered around the table to plan their next move. The tunnel would allow them access to the hotel unseen, but retrieving the evidence from Whitley's room would require precise timing and no small amount of luck. "The senator dines at 8 each evening," Isaiah reported. "Takes at least an hour, sometimes longer if he's entertaining guests. Tonight he's meeting with several local businessmen in the hotel restaurant." "That's our window," Elias decided. "I'll go through the tunnel while Whitley's at dinner, find the evidence, and return the same way." "I'm coming with you," Abigail said firmly. Elias shook his head. "Too dangerous. I need you to stay here with Clara." "With respect, Colonel, I've been involved in this from the beginning. I know exactly what we're looking for. The ledgers, the correspondence, the client list. I'll recognize the evidence more quickly than you will." Her gaze was steady, her resolve evident. "And 2 sets of eyes are better than 1. Samuel cleared his throat. "She's right, Colonel, and time will be short. If the senator follows his usual pattern, you'll have perhaps 30 minutes at most." Elias wanted to argue further, to insist that Abigail remain safely hidden, but he recognized the logic of her position. This wasn't about protection anymore. It was about successfully completing a mission, and for that her knowledge was indeed invaluable. "Very well," he conceded, "but you follow my lead, and if I say run, you run. No arguments." "Agreed," Abigail replied, a hint of triumph in her voice. As they prepared for the infiltration, gathering tools and planning their route, Clara watched from her sickbed with growing distress. "This is all because of me," she said softly when Abigail came to check on her. "I should never have involved you. Any of you." "Don't say that," Abigail replied, taking the younger woman's hand. "You discovered a terrible injustice and had the courage to expose it. Whatever happens now, remember that." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "But at what cost? The Colonel's family, your safety, Isaiah and Samuel's risk? All because I couldn't leave well enough alone." "Some evils cannot be left unchallenged," Elias said, approaching the bed. "Whitley's crimes would have continued, claiming more victims, destroying more lives. You chose to stand against that at great personal risk. There's no higher courage." His words seemed to provide some comfort, though doubt still shadowed Clara's expression. "Be careful," she urged them. "He's more dangerous than you know." "We'll be back before you know it," Abigail assured her, squeezing her hand before rising. The plan was set. At precisely 8:30, when Whitley would be deep into his dinner engagement, Elias and Abigail would enter the tunnel from the storeroom behind Samuel's smithy. If all went well, they would retrieve the evidence and return the same way, hopefully before Whitley left the restaurant. Samuel provided them with dark clothing to replace their dust-covered trail wear. For Elias, a simple black shirt and trousers that might pass for a hotel employee's attire if glimpsed briefly. For Abigail, a plain dark dress borrowed from a neighbor, similarly inconspicuous. "What happens after we get the evidence?" Abigail asked as they changed. "Whitley won't simply surrender when confronted. Samuel has a contact in the next county, a telegraph operator not controlled by Whitley," Elias explained. "Once we have the evidence, we'll send a message to Marshal Davies in Austin, bypassing the local office entirely. Davies can bring federal authorities, men not susceptible to Whitley's influence or bribes. And until then we stay hidden. The evidence is our only protection." As 8 o'clock approached, tension mounted in the small house. Samuel checked and rechecked the tunnel entrance, ensuring it was clear and providing lanterns that could be shuttered to avoid detection. Isaiah prepared medical supplies in case of injury, while Clara watched with worried eyes from her bed. "Time," Samuel announced finally, returning from a quick reconnaissance of the street. "The senator just entered the hotel dining room with 3 local ranchers. Your window is open." Elias nodded, securing his Colt in its holster and adding a knife in his boot as backup. Abigail wore a determined expression, her earlier fear apparently mastered by the urgency of their mission. "If we're not back in 2 hours," Elias told Samuel, "assume we've been captured. Get Clara and Isaiah out of town. Head for the Mexican border." "We'll be waiting," Samuel replied, clasping Elias's hand firmly. "God go with you both." The storeroom behind the smithy was cluttered with iron stock, old tools, and miscellaneous equipment accumulated over years of business. Samuel led them to the far corner, where he moved aside several heavy barrels to reveal a trapdoor set into the earthen floor. "Hasn't been used in years," he warned as he lifted it, revealing a dark opening and narrow wooden steps descending into the gloom. "Watch for weak spots." Elias went first, lantern held low, testing each step before committing his weight. The stairs creaked ominously but held. Abigail followed close behind, her breathing quick but controlled. The tunnel itself was roughly 5 feet high, forcing Elias to stoop as they proceeded. The walls were shored up with timber at irregular intervals, some of which had begun to rot with age and dampness. The air was stale, heavy with the sense of earth and decay. "How old is this?" Abigail whispered, her voice unnaturally loud in the confined space. "Dates back to Redemption's earliest days," Elias replied quietly, "when the town was little more than a trading post with aspirations. The original owner of the hotel was a gambling man with creative ideas about customer service." They moved cautiously, the shuttered lantern providing just enough light to avoid hazards. According to Samuel's map, the tunnel ran straight for approximately 200 yards before turning sharply to access the hotel basement. Their progress seemed agonizingly slow. Each step measured, each sound amplified in the close quarters. About halfway along, they encountered their first serious obstacle, a section where the ceiling had partially collapsed, leaving barely 2 feet of clearance beneath a precariously balanced beam. "I'll go first," Elias said, handing Abigail the lantern. "If it holds my weight, it should hold yours." He lowered himself to his stomach and began to ease forward, inch by careful inch. The beam above creaked alarmingly, small showers of dirt raining down with each movement. Elias froze, waiting for the settling to stop before continuing. It took nearly 5 minutes to traverse the 10-foot section, every moment risking a catastrophic collapse that would trap them underground. When Elias finally reached the other side, he released a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Your turn," he called softly to Abigail. "Move exactly as I did and don't rush." Abigail passed him the lantern, then began her own slow progress through the narrow gap. Elias watched anxiously, aware that her smaller frame was an advantage, but concerned by the increasingly ominous creaks from the stressed timber. "Almost there," he encouraged as she neared the halfway point. Suddenly, a sharp crack split the silence. The beam shifted, dropping several inches as one end splintered. Dirt and debris showered down on Abigail, who froze in momentary panic. "Don't move," Elias hissed, assessing the situation rapidly. The beam hadn't failed completely, but it was now resting partly on Abigail's back, pinning her in place. Any sudden movement might bring the entire section down. He set the lantern aside and carefully extended his hand toward her. "Reach for me, slowly. I'll pull you through." Abigail's eyes were wide with fear, but she controlled it admirably, extending her arm by increments until their fingers touched, then clasped. "On 3, Elias said calmly. "I'm going to pull. Not hard, just steady. Ready? 1, 2, 3. He applied gentle but firm pressure, drawing Abigail forward as the beam continued to creak and settle above her. Dirt filled her hair, Dust at her face, but she kept her focus, inching forward as Elias maintained the steady pull. With a final effort, she cleared the collapse zone, and Elias helped her to her feet. They stood for a moment, breathing heavily, covered in dust but unharmed. "I hate confined spaces," Abigail whispered shakily. "You did well," Elias assured her. "Most people would have panicked." They continued more cautiously now, aware that the tunnel's stability was more compromised than Samuel had realized. Time was passing, precious minutes of their narrow window for accessing Whitley's room. Finally, they reached the sharp turn that indicated the approach of the hotel basement. The passage grew marginally wider here, with more frequent support beams suggesting more careful construction. "We must be close," Elias murmured. And indeed, within moments, they encountered another set of wooden stairs, these better maintained than those at the tunnel entrance. Elias ascended slowly, listening intently for any sound from above. The trap door at the top was similar to the one they had entered through, though smaller and secured with a simple bolt rather than a lock. He handed the lantern to Abigail, then carefully slid back the bolt, easing the trap door open just enough to peer into the space beyond. The hotel basement was dimly lit by a single gas lamp, filled with storage crates and trunks belonging to guests. Most importantly, it appeared deserted. Elias pushed the door fully open and climbed out, then helped Abigail up. They closed the trap door quietly, concealing it behind a stack of empty crates as an added precaution. "Service stairs should be that way," Elias whispered, pointing toward the far corner of the basement. They moved silently through the cluttered space, every sense alert for danger. The stairs, when they found them, were narrow and steep, clearly meant for staff rather than guests. A closed door at the top presumably led to the hotel's ground floor. Elias paused with his hand on the doorknob, listening. Faint sounds filtered through, voices from the distant dining room, the occasional footstep of someone passing in the hallway beyond. He waited for a moment of relative quiet, then eased the door open a crack. The service quarter was empty, running perpendicular to the main hallway. Hotel staff would use this passage to move between floors without disturbing guests. It was perfect for their purposes. "Second floor," Elias breathed to Abigail. "Room 12, east side." They climbed the service stairs to the second floor, encountering no one. The hotel was small by city standards, with perhaps 20 guest rooms in total. Finding room 12 would not be difficult, but accessing it unseen was another matter. Elias cracked open the second floor service door, peering into another empty corridor. According to Isaiah's intelligence, 2 of Whitley's men patrolled the halls. They would need to time their move carefully. "Wait for my signal," he told Abigail. "When I'm sure it's clear, we move quickly. No hesitation." She nodded, her face set with determination despite the dust still clinging to her hair and clothes. They had come too far to falter now. Elias counted slowly to 60, listening for the sound of footsteps that would indicate a guard's patrol pattern. Sure enough, heavy boots approached, passed the service door, then receded toward the main staircase. He waited another minute to ensure the guard had continued downstairs, then eased the door open. "Now," he whispered, and they slipped into the hallway. Room 12 was halfway along, its brass number polished to a shine that caught the light from the wall sconces. Elias led the way, moving with the silent precision that had once served him well on nighttime scouting missions during the war. They reached the door without incident, but now faced the most significant obstacle yet, the lock. Elias withdrew a slim metal tool from his pocket, a remnant of his military days when such skills were sometimes necessary. "Keep watch," he murmured to Abigail as he bent to his task. The lock was of good quality, but not exceptional. Elias worked methodically, feeling for the tumblers with practiced fingers. After what seemed an eternity but was likely less than a minute, he felt the satisfying click of the mechanism yielding. He straightened, meeting Abigail's anxious gaze. "Ready?" She nodded and Elias turned the handle, pushing the door open just enough for them to slip through before closing it silently behind them. Senator Marcus Whitley's hotel room was luxurious by redemption standards. A large bed with fine linens, quality furniture, crystal decanters of liquor on a side table. A writing desk stood beneath the window overlooking the main street, papers neatly organized upon its surface. "Start with the desk," Elias directed. "I'll check for a safe." They worked quickly, aware that each passing minute increased the risk of discovery. Abigail rifled through the papers on the desk, while Elias searched for hidden compartments or concealed strongboxes. "Nothing here but correspondence about campaign matters," Abigail reported after a moment. "Nothing incriminating." "A man like Whitley wouldn't leave evidence in plain sight," Elias replied, running his hands along the walls, feeling for irregularities. "There must be a safe or secure container." He checked behind the paintings, beneath the rug, inside the wardrobe. Finally, behind a false panel in the base of the wardrobe, he found what they sought, A small iron safe with a combination lock. Here, he called softly to Abigail, but it's locked. She joined him, examining the safe with a frown. Can you open it like you did the door? Combination locks are different, Elias admitted. I'd need more time and tools than we have. Frustration washed over him. They had come so far, risked so much only to be thwarted by a simple mechanical device. The evidence they needed was inches away, yet completely inaccessible. Wait, Abigail said suddenly. Men like Whitley, powerful men used to controlling everything. They often have patterns, habits. She scanned the room thinking aloud. He'd choose a combination he wouldn't forget, something significant to him personally. A birth date, perhaps, Elias suggested. No, too obvious. Abigail's brow furrowed in concentration. Something that matters to him, that represents his power. Her eyes widened. The eagle ring, the signet of your regiment. When was the 7th Cavalry formed? July 28th, 18th, Elias replied automatically. The date burned into his memory. You think? Try it, Abigail urged. 7/28/66. Skeptical but lacking alternatives, Elias turned the dial carefully, aligning each number in sequence. When he pulled the handle afterward, he was astonished to feel the mechanism release. It worked, he breathed, swinging the door open. Inside lay several items, a leather-bound ledger, a packet of letters tied with string, and a small black book with no external markings. Abigail reached past him, retrieving each item with trembling hands. This is it, she confirmed, quickly scanning the ledger. Names, dates, amounts paid, and here, she indicated the black book. Client information. Everything we need. Take it all, Elias directed, producing a small canvas bag from inside his shirt. They were transferring the items when a sound froze them both, footsteps approaching in the hallway outside, heavy and purposeful. Then voices, one of which Elias recognized immediately as Whitley's. Dinner ended early, he hissed, closing the safe and replacing the false panel. We need to go, now. But it was too late. The footsteps had stopped outside the door, and a key was turning in the lock. There was no time for subtlety. As the door began to open, Elias grabbed Abigail's arm and pulled her toward the window, the only possible escape route. The canvas bag with their precious evidence was clutched tightly in her free hand. Behind me, he whispered, drawing at his Colt. The door swung open to reveal Senator Marcus Whitley, resplendent in an expensive black suit, his silver hair perfectly groomed. Behind him stood one of his guards, a hard-faced man with a revolver holstered at his hip. Both froze momentarily at the sight of the intruders. Recognition dawned in Whitley's cold gray eyes. Colonel Carter, he said, his voice betraying only mild surprise, as if finding an armed man in his hotel room was a minor inconvenience rather than a crisis. I see you've brought Miss Moore. How convenient. Step aside, Marcus, Elias ordered, his Colt trained steadily on the senator's chest. We're leaving. I think not. Whitley's gaze shifted to the canvas bag in Abigail's hand, his expression hardening. You have something that belongs to me. The guard moved to draw his weapon, but Whitley raised a hand, stopping him. Patience, Mr. Rhodes. The colonel won't shoot, not in cold blood. It's not in his nature. His thin lips curved in a smile that held no warmth. Isn't that right, Elias? You always were reluctant to do what was necessary. I wouldn't test that theory, Elias replied, his voice dangerously calm. Not after what you did to Elizabeth and Emma. A flicker of surprise crossed Whitley's face, quickly masked. Ah, so Nathaniel told you. I wondered if he would. He sighed theatrically. A regrettable necessity, I assure you. Elizabeth was becoming problematic, asking too many questions about one of my business associates. And as for your daughter, well, collateral damage is an unfortunate reality in our line of work, as you well know. The casual dismissal of his family's murders sent a surge of cold rage through Elias. His finger tightened almost imperceptibly on the trigger, the temptation to end Whitley's life nearly overwhelming. Abigail sensed his struggle. Elias, she said softly, this isn't the way. Her voice anchored him, pulling him back from the brink. She was right. Killing Whitley would be satisfying, but it wouldn't bring justice. Not true justice that would dismantle his entire operation and free his victims. We have what we came for, Elias told Whitley, his Colt unwavering. Step aside, or I swear to God, I will put a bullet in you. Whitley's eyes narrowed, measuring the threat. Whatever he saw in Elias's expression must have convinced him, for he slowly stepped back, pulling his guard with him to clear a path to the door. This changes nothing, the senator said as they edged past. You're still a wanted man, Colonel, and Miss Moore a murderess. The evidence of two fugitives won't stand in any court. We'll take our chances, Elias replied, backing toward the door with Abigail behind him. They were almost clear when Whitley made his move, not reaching for a weapon as Elias had anticipated, but lunging suddenly for Abigail, his hands grasping for the canvas bag. She cried out, struggling to maintain her grip on their precious cargo. Elias reacted instantly, bringing the butt of his Colt down hard on Whitley's outstretched arm. The senator howled in pain, recoiling. At the same moment, the guard, Rhodes, drew his weapon. What happened next unfolded in heartbeats. Elias shoved Abigail through the doorway as Rhodes fired, the bullet grazing Elias's left shoulder. Ignoring the burning pain, Elias returned fire, his shot catching Rhodes high in the chest. The guard staggered back, his weapon clattering to the floor. "Run!" Elias shouted to Abigail, firing once more into the room, not aiming to hit, but to keep Whitley pinned down, before slamming the door and following her down the hallway. The gunshots had shattered the evening quiet. Shouts erupted from below as Whitley's remaining men responded to the commotion. Heavy footsteps pounded up the main staircase at the end of the corridor. "Service stairs," Elias directed, guiding Abigail with a hand at her back. "Quickly!" They reached the service door just as two armed men appeared at the top of the main stairs. Bullets splintered the woodwork around them as Elias shoved Abigail through, following close behind. "They have my ledgers!" Whitley's voice carried clearly, filled with cold fury. $5,000 to the man who stops them." The service stairs echoed with their rapid footfalls as they descended, the sounds of pursuit growing behind them. Elias's shoulder throbbed, warm blood soaking his shirt, but he pushed the pain aside, focusing on escape. "The tunnel?" Abigail gasped as they reached the ground floor. "Risky. They'll expect it," Elias replied, leading her not toward the basement, but through a side door into the hotel kitchen. Out the back, into the alley. The kitchen staff froze in surprise as the armed, bloodied man and disheveled woman burst through, but Elias gave them no time to react, pulling Abigail past startled cooks and dishwashers to the rear exit. The night air hit them like a bomb after the close heat of the kitchen. The alley behind the hotel was narrow and dark, lined with barrels and crates awaiting delivery. Elias paused, orienting himself, then pointed west. "This way, toward the livery. If we can reach horses." A shot rang out, the bullet striking a barrel near Elias's head, showering them with splinters. At the mouth of the alley stood another of Whitley's men, revolver raised for a second shot. "Down!" Elias pushed Abigail behind a stack of crates, returning fire as they crouched for cover. His shot went wide, but forced their attacker to seek his own shelter. "We're pinned," Abigail realized, clutching the canvas bag to her chest. Elias quickly assessed their situation. More of Whitley's men would be arriving momentarily. The tunnel entrance was now cut off, as was their planned escape route back to Samuel's smithy. They were trapped in the alley with limited ammunition and nowhere to run. "Give me the bag," he said suddenly, an idea forming. Abigail handed it over, and Elias quickly emptied its contents, distributing the ledger, letters, and black book between them. The ledger and letters went inside Abigail's dress, tucked into the special pocket Samuel's neighbor had sewn for valuables. The black book Elias secured inside his shirt. "If we're separated," he explained, "neither of us has everything. Increases the chances some evidence reaches Marshal Davies." Understanding dawned in Abigail's eyes. "You're creating a diversion." "I'll draw their fire," Elias confirmed, handing her his spare ammunition. "When they focus on me, you slip out the other end of the alley. Make for the church at the edge of town. Sheriff Jenkins lives in the house beside it. He's our best chance now." "I won't leave you," Abigail protested. "Yes, you will," Elias said firmly. "The evidence is what matters. It's bigger than both of us." Before she could argue further, another shot struck near them, followed by shouted instructions as more of Whitley's men arrived. They were running out of time. "Go when I start firing," Elias instructed. "Stay low and don't look back." He didn't wait for her agreement, knowing she would do what was necessary when the moment came. Rising slightly from their cover, he aimed carefully at a stack of empty bottles beside one of Whitley's men, sending glass exploding in all directions. As the men ducked for cover, Elias fired again, then again, creating the impression of a determined stand. From the corner of his eye, he saw Abigail slipping away, keeping to the shadows as she moved toward the far end of the alley. "Good girl," he thought with a surge of pride. "Smart and brave to the end." Elias continued his covering fire until she disappeared from view, then prepared for his own attempt to escape. His ammunition was limited, 3 shots remaining in the Colt, with no time to reload. He would need to make them count. Just as he was preparing to move, a new voice called out from behind Whitley's men. "That's enough shooting in my town, gentlemen." Sheriff Thomas Jenkins stood at the entrance to the alley, his rifle leveled at Whitley's hired guns. Behind him were several townsmen, similarly armed. "This is official business, Sheriff," one of Whitley's men protested. "Senator's orders." "Last I checked, I'm the law and redemption," Jenkins replied evenly. "And I don't recall deputizing any of you to shoot up my town." His gaze found Elias in the shadows. "Colonel Carter, throw out your weapon and come out with your hands visible." It was a gamble, but Elias was out of options. Carefully, he tossed his Colt into the open, then emerged from behind the crates, hands raised. His left shoulder burned with each movement, blood now soaking his entire sleeve. "He broke into the senator's room," one of Whitley's men accused. "Stole private property." "Is that so?" Jenkins's expression revealed nothing. "Well then, he'll have to answer for it. In a proper jail cell, not a back alley execution." He gestured with his rifle. "Colonel, you're coming with me. The rest of you disperse. Now." The hired guns hesitated, clearly calculating whether they could take on Jenkins and his impromptu posse. After a tense moment, they backed down, though their expressions promised this wasn't over. Jenkins approached Elias, keeping his rifle ready. "You're in a world of trouble, Carter," he said loudly, then added in a whisper as he got closer, "Miss Moore made it to my house. My wife's looking after her." Relief washed through Elias. Abigail was safe, and with her, the most damning evidence against Whitley. His gamble had paid off. Jenkins made a show of restraining him, though the handcuffs were applied loosely enough to avoid aggravating his wounded shoulder. "Let's go, Colonel. We've got some talking to do." As they walked through town toward the jailhouse, curious onlookers gathered to watch the spectacle. Elias kept his head high, ignoring the whispers and stares. Jenkins's men formed a protective barrier, ensuring none of Whitley's people could interfere. The jail was a small brick building with 2 cells, an office area, and little else. Jenkins dismissed his posse with thanks, then locked the front door behind them. "That should keep the curious at bay for a while," he said, removing Elias's handcuffs. "Though I reckon the senator will be here demanding your head before long." "Probably," Elias agreed, wincing as he eased himself onto a chair. "Where's Abigail?" "Safe at my house, as I said. My wife was a nurse during the war. She's tending to your friend now." Jenkins fetched a first aid kit from a cabinet. "Speaking of tending, let me look at that shoulder." While the sheriff cleaned and bandaged his wound, a deep graze rather than a penetrating injury, Elias explained everything. Whitley's trafficking operation, the evidence they had obtained, Elizabeth and Emma's murders, and Nathaniel's revelations. Jenkins listened without interruption, his weathered face growing grimmer with each detail. When Elias finished, the sheriff sat back, digesting the information. "I knew Whitley was corrupt," he said finally. "Most politicians are, to some degree. But this," he shook his head, "this is beyond corruption. It's pure evil." "That's why we need to get the evidence to Marshal Davies," Elias pressed. "He has the authority to arrest a U.S. senator, especially with federal crimes involved." "Davies is a good man," Jenkins agreed, "but getting a message to him won't be easy. Whitley controls the telegraph office, and the stage won't leave until morning, assuming they don't search every passenger. Samuel Wells mentioned a contact in the next county, a telegraph operator who could send a message bypassing redemption entirely." Jenkins nodded thoughtfully. "Jeremiah Tucker, over in Cooperville. Good man, fought for the Union. But it's 20 miles, and you can bet Whitley's men will be watching every road out of town." "What about your deputy? Could he carry the message?" "Young Billy," Jenkins snorted. "Boy's barely 20, never fired his weapon outside of practice. Besides, he's sweet on the telegraph operator's daughter. Whitley would know if he left town suddenly." Elias weighed their options. Time was critical. Once Whitley realized the extent of what had been taken, he would move quickly to either recover the evidence or flee the jurisdiction. "What about Nathaniel?" he asked finally. "My brother. He's supposedly working for Whitley, but he's been feeding us information. If he's truly turned, he might be able to get a message through." "Risky," Jenkins observed. "If he's playing both sides, he could just as easily betray you to Whitley." "True, but we're running out of options and time." Jenkins seemed about to respond when a commotion erupted outside. Raised voices, the sound of multiple horses arriving. He moved to the window, peering through the blinds. "Well, that didn't take long," he muttered. "Senator Whitley himself with about a dozen men. Looks like he's brought half the town, too." Elias joined him at the window. Sure enough, Whitley sat astride a magnificent black stallion in front of the jailhouse, addressing a growing crowd of townspeople. Even from inside, snippets of his speech carried clearly. Accusations about dangerous fugitives, stolen private property, the safety of the good citizens of redemption being threatened. "He's working the crowd," Elias observed, "turning them against us." Standard politician's tactic, Jenkins replied dryly, and he's good at it. The crowd was indeed responding to Whitley's oratory, murmurs of agreement growing louder, occasional shouts of support punctuating his speech. Whitley was weaving a masterful narrative. The upstanding senator and gubernatorial candidate cruelly targeted by dangerous criminals with a personal vendetta. They'll be calling for my resignation next, Jenkins predicted grimly, followed by a lynch mob for you. A loud knock at the jailhouse door confirmed his assessment. Sheriff Jenkins, a voice called. The senator requests a word. Jenkins sighed, checking that his revolver was secure in its holster. Showtime, Colonel. Best if you're actually in a cell when I open that door. For appearance's sake. Elias nodded, moving to the nearest cell. The strategic value of appearing to be a legitimate prisoner was obvious. Jenkins locked the cell door, pocketing the key, then squared his shoulders and went to face the crowd. The moment the sheriff opened the door, Whitley pushed his way inside, followed by 3 of his men. The senator had composed himself since the hotel confrontation, his suit immaculate once more, his arm showing no sign of the injury Elias had inflicted. Only the cold rage in his eyes betrayed his true emotions. Sheriff, he began without preamble, I demand the immediate transfer of this prisoner to my custody. He has stolen private documents vital to my campaign and my business interests. Jenkins stood his ground, thumbs hooked in his belt near his revolver. Afraid I can't do that, Senator. Colonel Carter is in my custody, charged with breaking and entering. He'll face a proper trial in due course. This is unacceptable, Whitley hissed, dropping the public facade now that they were relatively private. You have no idea what you're involving yourself in, Jenkins. I have connections that could crush this backwater town, and you with it. Perhaps, Jenkins allowed, but right now I'm the law in redemption, and the law says prisoners stay in jail until trial. His hand moved closer to his weapon. Unless you're planning to overthrow the law itself, Senator? The standoff stretched, tension crackling between them. Finally, Whitley took a step back, his expression calculating. Very well, Sheriff. Have it your way. For now. He glanced at Elias, his gaze venomous. But know this, I have men watching every road, every trail out of redemption. The evidence you stole will never reach Austin. And by morning, I'll have a signed order from the territorial governor for your transfer to state custody. With that, he turned and swept out, his men following. Jenkins closed the door behind them, exhaling slowly. He's not bluffing about those men watching the roads, he said, or about the governor. Whitley has him in his pocket. Elias considered their rapidly narrowing options. What about the old cattle trails, the ones that haven't been used since the railroad came through? Possibly, Jenkins conceded, but you'd need a guide who knows them well. Most are overgrown, dangerous in the dark. Before they could discuss further, a soft knock came at the back door of the jailhouse, a sequence of taps that made Jenkins reach for his gun. That's not one of my men, he murmured, approaching cautiously. Wait, Elias said, recognizing the pattern. That's Samuel's signal. Jenkins unholstered his weapon anyway, standing to the side of the door before carefully opening it. Samuel Wells stood there, his massive frame filling the doorway, with Isaiah just behind him. Evening, Sheriff, Samuel greeted him quietly. Mind if we come in? Jenkins ushered them inside, locking the door again. You picked a hell of a time for a social call, Wells. Not social, Samuel replied, his deep voice serious. We have news and a plan. Jenkins unlocked Elias's cell, allowing him to join the discussion around the small desk that served as the sheriff's workspace. Isaiah produced a folded paper from inside his coat, a roughly drawn map of the area surrounding Redemption. Whitley's men have established checkpoints on all main roads, Samuel explained, indicating positions on the map. And they're patrolling the minor trails in the groups of 2 and 3, but his finger traced a thin line representing a waterway. They've left the old riverbed mostly unwatched. The Dry Fork had once been a substantial river flowing past Redemption, but years of drought and upstream diversions had reduced it to little more than a creek in most places, with stretches completely dry during summer months. Its winding course was difficult to follow and rarely used as a travel route. It's rough going, Jenkins observed. Lots of exposed rock, steep banks in places. Yes, Isaiah agreed, but it connects eventually to Cooperville, where the telegraph operator you need is located. A messenger could follow it all the way there, staying out of sight. What messenger? Elias asked. Whitley knows all of us by sight now. Samuel smiled slightly. Not all of us, Colonel. Understanding dawned. Clara, Elias said. You're suggesting we send Clara. She's recovered enough to ride, Isaiah confirmed. Not comfortably, but she can manage, and she has the strongest motivation of all. Whitley is her father, and she wants justice for her mother. It's too dangerous, Elias protested. She's still recovering from a gunshot wound. It was her idea, Samuel said quietly. When she heard what happened at the hotel, she insisted. Said it was her responsibility to finish what she started. Elias hesitated, torn between the strategic value of the plan and concern for Clara's safety. What about Abigail? Is she still at your house, Sheriff? Jenkins nodded. My wife's keeping her hidden. Whitley's men have already searched the place once, but they didn't find her. The evidence is split between them, Elias explained. If Whitley captures one, he still won't have everything he needs. All the more reason to get Clara on the move now, while Whitley's focus is here, Samuel urged. She can take the black book from Miss Moore, leaving the ledger and letters as backup. The logic was sound, but Elias still hesitated. Clara had already endured so much because of her connection to Whitley. Asking her to risk her life again seemed cruel. There's something else you should know, Isaiah added, his voice lowered. Your brother is at our house, Colonel. He arrived shortly after the commotion at the hotel, looking for you. Nathaniel at your house? Elias's suspicion flared immediately. How did he find it? Said he followed Miss Moore from the alley, Samuel replied, but didn't interfere because he wanted to see where she went. Or so he claims, Elias said darkly. He wants to help, Samuel continued. Offered to escort Clara along the dry fork to Cooperville. Says he knows a route even the locals have forgotten. The coincidence was too neat, raising Elias's instinctive caution. It could be a trap, Nathaniel leading Clara straight to Whitley. Possible, Samuel acknowledged, but the girl trusts him oddly enough. Says he was kind to her when she was held captive, sneaked her extra food and water when the others weren't looking. Elias rubbed his bandaged shoulder, weighing the risk against the potential reward. If Clara and Nathaniel succeeded in reaching Cooperville and sending the telegram to Marshal Davies, they could bring the full force of federal authority down on Whitley before he could escape or destroy more evidence. But if Nathaniel betrayed them, I need to speak with my brother, he decided, face to face. Impossible, Jenkins interjected. Whitley's men are watching the jail. If you leave, they'll follow, leading them straight to Samuel's house and the others. Then bring him here, Elias countered. Through the back. If anyone sees, say you've arrested another conspirator. Jenkins and Samuel exchanged glances, considering the proposal. Finally, the sheriff nodded. It's risky, but so is every other option at this point. Samuel, can you fetch Nathaniel without being seen? There's a way through the back alleys, Samuel confirmed. We'll be careful. As Samuel and Isaiah prepared to leave, Elias called them back. One more thing. If I'm not convinced of Nathaniel's intentions, Clara doesn't go with him, no matter what she says. Are we clear? Both men nodded solemnly before slipping out the back door into the gathering darkness. Jenkins locked it behind them, then returned to his desk. You really think your brother might have changed sides? He asked, pouring 2 mugs of coffee from a pot that had been warming on the small stove. I don't know, Elias admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. Nathaniel's always been unpredictable and self-serving. He stared into the dark liquid. But he did warn me about Whitley's plans and about Elizabeth and Emma. Family's complicated, Jenkins observed. Even when they disappoint you, blood still calls to blood. They waited in tense silence, Elias trying to decide what he would say to his brother after their brief reunion at the creek crossing. How could he possibly determine Nathaniel's true loyalties after 15 years of estrangement? The answer came to him gradually, a memory from their childhood in Virginia. Their father, a stern disciplinarian, had taught them a game, a way of detecting lies that had served Elias well during his military career. If Nathaniel remembered it, it might provide a way to cut through deception. Nearly an hour passed before the soft knock came again at the back door. Jenkins admitted Samuel, who was followed by a figure Elias recognized immediately despite the poor light. Nathaniel Carter, his scarred face wary, his hand never far from the revolver at his hip. The brothers faced each other across the small jailhouse office, measuring each other in silence. Nathaniel looked tired, Elias thought. Yes, tired and older than his 48 years, the weight of his choices evident in the lines of his face. You've looked better, brother, Nathaniel finally said, unconsciously echoing his greeting at their last meeting. Getting shot will do that, Elias replied dryly. A ghost of a smile touched Nathaniel's lips. So I hear. His gaze moved to the bandaged shoulder. You'll live. You always do. Samuel says you want to help Clara reach Cooperville, Elias said, bypassing the small talk. Why? Nathaniel shrugged, a gesture that reminded Elias painfully of their father. Why not? Whitley plans to kill me anyway. Might as well earn it. That's not a reason, Elias pressed. That's an excuse. Fine. Nathaniel's expression hardened. Because I'm tired, Elias. Tired of what I've become. Tired of serving men like Whitley. He gestured to the scar that marked his face. This wasn't the worst wound from the war. The worst was what happened inside, what I let myself become afterward. The words held the ring of truth, but Elias needed more. Remember Father's game? The one he taught us for detecting lies? Nathaniel's eyebrows rose slightly. The Queen's questions. 3 questions, answered immediately, no time to construct a lie. He nodded. Go ahead, ask. Elias didn't hesitate. Did you know Whitley planned to kill Elizabeth and Emma before it happened? No, Nathaniel answered instantly. I found out after, when he boasted about it during a drunk evening, said it had been regrettably necessary. Why didn't you tell me then? Because I was a coward, Nathaniel replied, his gaze unwavering. Because I was afraid of what Whitley would do to me if I betrayed him. And because I was afraid of what you would do to me when you learned I was working for him. Elias absorbed this, then asked his final question. If you help Clara reach Cooperville, what do you want in return? Nothing, Nathaniel said, then amended. No, that's not true. I want peace, Elias. Not from you, not from the law, from myself. He touched the scar on his face absently. I've done terrible things, things I can't undo, but this, helping bring down Whitley, maybe it's a start. The room fell silent as Elias considered his brother's answers. The Queen's questions worked because they allowed no time for constructing plausible lies. The first answer that came to mind was usually the truth, and Nathaniel's responses had been immediate, unguarded, and consistent with his behavior since their reunion. I believe you, Elias said finally, but understand this. If any harm comes to Clara, if you betray her to Whitley, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth, brother or not. Fair enough, Nathaniel acknowledged. Though if I betray her, I suspect she'd shoot me herself. Spirited girl, that one. Reminds me of her mother. You knew her mother? Elias asked, surprised. A shadow crossed Nathaniel's face. Maria. She was a housemaid in Whitley's Virginia home. Beautiful, intelligent, too good for the life she was given. His expression darkened. He used her, then discarded her when she became pregnant, arranged for the child to be adopted by a supporter who owed him favors, but kept Maria working in his household, a daily reminder of his power over her. What happened to her? Jenkins asked, speaking for the first time since Nathaniel's arrival. Whitley claimed she died of influenza the winter after Clara was born, Nathaniel replied, but I always suspected he had her eliminated when she threatened to tell his wife about the child. The pattern was clear, Whitley disposing of women who threatened his reputation or operations, making their deaths appear natural. Elizabeth, Maria, how many others? Clara deserves justice for her mother, Elias said, as I do for my family. Then let me help her get it, Nathaniel urged. I know the Dry Fork better than anyone in these parts. Used to hunt along it before the war, when we first moved to Texas. There's a path most locals have forgotten, high along the eastern bank, that offers cover and good visibility. Elias looked at Jenkins, who nodded slightly. It could work. If they leave tonight, they could reach Cooperville by mid-morning tomorrow. Tucker could send the telegram immediately, and Davies might have federal marshals here by nightfall. And what about you, Colonel? Samuel asked. Whitley will have that transfer order by morning. I'll handle Whitley, Jenkins said grimly. Been wanting to put that man in his place for years. And I'll stay right here, Elias added, in this cell, following the law to the letter. Let Whitley focus on me while Clara and Nathaniel get through. What about Miss Moore and the other evidence? Isaiah asked. If Whitley gets that transfer order, Abigail will take the ledger and letters to the church, Elias decided. Seek sanctuary with Reverend Johnson. He's a former abolitionist with no love for men like Whitley. He'll protect her and the evidence until Davies arrives. The plan was taking shape, each person with a role to play in bringing Whitley to justice. It was dangerous, all of them risking their lives and freedom, but the alternative was allowing a monster to escape punishment for his crimes. One last thing, Nathaniel said, reaching into his coat. Everyone tensed, but he withdrew only a folded paper. This came for you, Elias. Waited till he received it this afternoon, but kept it from you. Elias took the telegram, unfolding it carefully. As he read, a slow smile spread across his face. It's from Marshal Davies, he announced. Dated yesterday. He received my letter and is already on his way with a federal warrant for Whitley's arrest on suspicion of human trafficking. Should arrive by noon tomorrow. The news electrified the room. If Davies was already en route, Clara and Nathaniel wouldn't need to make the dangerous journey to Cooperville. They just needed to keep Whitley in redemption until the marshal arrived. That changes things, Jenkins said, his expression lightening for the first time that evening. We just need to stall until noon. Whitley will run if he suspects Davies is coming, Nathaniel warned. He keeps a fast horse ready at all times, and he knows every trail in these parts. Then we don't give him reason to run, Elias countered. Jenkins keeps me locked up, apparently following procedure. Whitley believes he has the situation contained. And the evidence? Samuel asked. Stays split between Abigail and Clara, hidden but accessible when Davies arrives. Elias turned to his brother. Nathaniel, you return to Whitley. Tell him you have been searching for Abigail without success. Keep him focused on the jailhouse and me. Nathaniel nodded slowly. It might work, but it's risky. If Whitley suspects anything, every plan has risks, Elias acknowledged, but this one keeps Clara safe and might just deliver Whitley to justice. With the new strategy agreed upon, they worked quickly to finalize details. Samuel would return to his house, informing Abigail and Clara of the change in plans. Nathaniel would rejoin Whitley, playing the loyal lieutenant while subtly delaying any attempts to secure Elias's transfer. Jenkins would maintain the pretense of following proper procedure, keeping Elias in custody until Davies arrived with federal authority. As dawn approached, they separated, each to their assigned tasks. Before Nathaniel left, Elias called him back for a final word. Watch yourself with Whitley, he warned. He's already suspicious of you. Nathaniel's scarred face twisted in a grim smile. Don't worry about me, brother. I've been dancing with the devil for years. One more day won't kill me. See that it doesn't, Elias replied. We have much to discuss when this is over. A look passed between them, not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of understanding. Nathaniel nodded once, then slipped out the back door into the pre-dawn darkness. The hours that followed were among the longest of Elias's life. He remained in the cell as agreed, playing the part of the captured fugitive while Jenkins maintained the facade of the dutiful sheriff. Whitley visited twice, first to gloat over Elias's capture, then to proudly display the transfer order signed by the territorial governor. You'll be leaving Redemption by noon, Colonel, he announced with cold satisfaction. I've arranged a special escort to ensure you reach the territorial prison safely. His smile never reached his eyes. Though I can't guarantee you'll actually arrive. These roads can be so dangerous. Elias met his gaze steadily. You won't win, Marcus. Not this time. I always win, Elias. That's what you never understood. Whitley adjusted his immaculate cuffs. Power isn't about being right or just. It's about being willing to do whatever is necessary. You never had the stomach for that. Is that what you told yourself after ordering Elizabeth and Emma killed? Elias asked quietly. That it was necessary? A flicker of surprise crossed Whitley's face, quickly masked. A regrettable business decision, he replied smoothly. Nothing personal, I assure you. It was personal to me, Elias said, his voice deceptively calm. And it will be personal to the federal marshals when they learn what you did. Whitley laughed, the sound empty of genuine amusement. Federal marshals? My dear Colonel, no marshal would dare touch a United States senator on the word of a fugitive. By the time any investigation could begin, the evidence you stole will be destroyed, and you'll be long dead. He left with that final threat hanging in the air, confident in his impunity. Jenkins, who had witnessed the exchange, shook his head in disgust. Man's so sure of himself, he can't even conceive of failure, the sheriff observed. Pride before the fall, Elias replied, though worry gnawed at him. It was nearly 11 and still no sign of Marshal Davies. Had something delayed him? Or worse, had Whitley's influence reached even to the federal marshals? As noon approached, the tension in Redemption was palpable. Whitley's men gathered outside the jailhouse, preparing to transport their prisoner. Curious townspeople formed a crowd to watch the spectacle, unaware of the true drama unfolding before them. At precisely noon, Jenkins received word that the transport wagon had arrived. The time had come to surrender Elias to Whitley's custody, unless Davies appeared in the next few minutes. Can't stall any longer, Colonel, Jenkins said regretfully, keys in hand. If I refuse to release you now, Whitley will have grounds to remove me as sheriff. Elias nodded grimly. Do what you must, Sheriff, but know that whatever happens, you did the right thing. Jenkins unlocked the cell, allowing Elias to step out. As he prepared to place handcuffs on his prisoner, a commotion erupted outside. Shouts, the sound of multiple horses arriving at speed. They exchanged hopeful glances, moving to the window. The scene outside had transformed dramatically. A dozen riders in the distinctive uniforms of federal marshals had entered the town, led by a tall, broad-shouldered man whose very presence commanded authority. Marshal William Davies, Elias's former comrade from before the war. Relief washed through Elias. Right on time, he murmured. The marshals dismounted in perfect formation, creating a perimeter around the jailhouse. Davies approached Whitley, who stood watching with barely concealed alarm. Though they couldn't hear the exchange, the body language told the story. Davies presenting papers, undoubtedly the federal warrant. Whitley's indignation, his attempt to intimidate through his senatorial status. Davies remaining unmoved, his men positioning themselves to prevent any interference. Jenkins opened the jailhouse door, allowing Davies to enter while his deputies maintained control outside. The marshal's weathered face broke into a rare smile at the sight of his old friend. "Elias Carter," he greeted him warmly. "Still finding trouble wherever you go, I see." "The trouble found me this time, Bill," Elias replied, clasping the marshal's hand firmly. Davies nodded to Jenkins with professional respect, then got straight to business. "Your letter contains serious accusations, Elias, but not enough evidence for a federal warrant on its own." His expression hardened. "What pushed it over the edge was a telegraph we received 3 days ago from a young woman named Clara Dawson, providing specific details about Whitley's operation that corroborated your claims." Elias exchanged surprised glances with Jenkins. "Clara sent a telegraph? Before we even reached Samuel's house?" "Apparently," Davies confirmed. "Said she was a victim who had escaped, provided names, dates, locations, enough for me to secure the warrant." He frowned slightly. "You didn't know?" "Clara never mentioned sending a telegraph," Elias said, amazed at the young woman's foresight and courage. "She must have done it from one of the towns they passed through while fleeing Virginia." "Smart girl," Jenkins commented. "Created a record outside Whitley's influence." "Indeed," Davies agreed. "Now I understand you have physical evidence as well?" "We do," Elias confirmed. "Ledgers, correspondence, a client list, everything needed to dismantle Whitley's entire operation and implicate his associates." "Excellent. Where is it?" "Split between 2 locations for safety," Elias explained. "I'll take you to them now." Outside, Whitley was being formally arrested, his protests falling on deaf ears as Davies' deputies read him his rights. The senator's hired guns stood down, unwilling to confront federal marshals even for their employer's substantial pay. As Elias emerged from the jailhouse, a ripple passed through the crowd. From the edge of the gathering, he spotted Abigail, with Samuel and Clara standing protectively beside her. Nathaniel lingered nearby, his expression unreadable, as he watched his former employer being led away in handcuffs. The crowd parted as Elias made his way toward them, Davies and Jenkins following close behind. When he reached Abigail, he fought the urge to embrace her, settling instead for a respectful nod that did nothing to hide the relief and admiration in his eyes. "Miss Moore," he said formally, "I believe you have something for Marshal Davies." Abigail reached into her dress, withdrawing the ledger and packet of letters. "Evidence of Senator Whitley's trafficking operation," she stated clearly, handing them to Davies. "Names, dates, amounts paid." Clara stepped forward, producing the black book from her own concealed pocket. "And this is his client list," she added, her voice steady despite the watching crowd. "Prominent men who purchased people." Davies accepted the materials with appropriate gravity. "Thank you, ladies. Your courage in bringing this forward is commendable." He turned to his deputies. "Secure these documents. They're federal evidence now." Whitley, still being held nearby, glared at Clara with undisguised hatred. "Ungrateful child," he spat. "I gave you life, and this is how you repay me?" Clara met his gaze without flinching. "You gave me nothing but shame and pain," she replied, her voice carrying clearly. "My mother was the one who gave me life, the woman you used and discarded. This is for her." A murmur ran through the crowd as the implication of her words sank in. Whitley's face contorted with rage, but before he could respond, Davies ordered him removed. "Get him to the wagon," the marshal directed. "We're taking him to Austin immediately for arraignment." As Whitley was led away, his final venomous glance fell not on Clara or Elias, but on Nathaniel. "You'll regret your betrayal, Carter," he called. "Men like us don't forgive." "I'm not like you," Nathaniel replied evenly. "Never was. Just took me too long to realize it." The tension that had gripped redemption for days began to dissipate as Whitley and his men were removed from the scene. Davies assigned deputies to collect statements from all involved, beginning the meticulous process of building the federal case. Elias found himself suddenly unoccupied, the driving purpose that had sustained him now fulfilled. He stood apart, watching as the various players in the drama spoke with authorities or returned to their normal lives. Abigail approached him quietly, her face showing the strain of the past days but also a profound relief. "It's over," she said simply. "Almost," Elias replied. "There will be trials, testimony. Whitley won't go down without a fight." "But he will go down," she said with certainty. "Too many victims, too much evidence. Even his connections can't save him now." Elias nodded, knowing she was right. Whitley's empire of exploitation would crumble, his political aspirations destroyed, his freedom forfeit. Justice, long delayed, was finally at hand. "What will you do now?" he asked Abigail. She considered the question thoughtfully. "Return to teaching, I think. Not in Virginia, too many memories there. Perhaps here in Texas. Her gaze met his directly. This land has a certain appeal that I hadn't appreciated before. The implication in her words was clear, bringing unexpected warmth to Elias's heart. At 58, he had considered that part of his life long over. Yet here was this remarkable woman, suggesting a future he hadn't dared to imagine. Texas can be harsh, he said carefully, but it has its rewards for those willing to weather the storms. I've never been afraid of storms, Colonel Carter, she replied with a small smile. Elias, he corrected gently. After all we've been through, I think you can use my given name. Elias, she repeated, the name sounding right on her lips. Before they could continue this promising conversation, Clara joined them, her young face showing the maturity of one who has endured too much too soon. Marshal Davies says they'll need my testimony in Austin, she said, about Whitley, about what I discovered. Are you prepared for that? Elias asked, concerned for her well-being. Clara straightened her shoulders, a gesture reminiscent of Elizabeth that sent a pang through Elias's heart. I started this journey to learn the truth about my father, she said. I found a monster instead. Now I'll see it through to the end, no matter how difficult. You won't be alone, Abigail assured her, taking her hand. We'll be there with you, every step. Nathaniel approached cautiously, keeping a respectful distance from the group. His gaze met Elias's, a question in his eyes that needed no voicing. Elias hesitated, then nodded slightly, inviting his brother to join them. Marshal Davies wants my statement as well, Nathaniel said as he drew near, about my role in Whitley's organization. He looked uncomfortable but resolved. I'll be facing charges, Elias, lesser ones with my cooperation, but still, there will be consequences. As there should be, Elias replied, not unkindly. You made your choices, Nathaniel. I did, his brother acknowledged, and now I'm making different ones. He glanced at Clara, starting with helping bring Whitley to justice. Clara studied him, then offered a small, significant gesture, extending her hand to the man who had once been her captor. Thank you for helping us at the end, she said simply. It doesn't erase what came before, but it matters. Nathaniel accepted her hand briefly, his scarred face showing a complexity of emotions. Small atonement for large sins, he murmured, but perhaps a beginning. The four of them stood together as the federal marshals completed their work, the unlikely alliance that had brought down a powerful predator. Each carried wounds both visible and hidden, yet each had found strength in the crucible of their shared ordeal. Later that evening, as the sun set over redemption, Elias stood on the porch of Samuel's house, watching the golden light paint the distant hills. The blacksmith had insisted they all stay for a celebration dinner, a moment of community after days of danger and division. Abigail joined him, standing close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. What are you thinking about? She asked. Elizabeth and Emma, he answered honestly, wondering if they can rest easier now. I believe they can, she said softly. Justice won't bring them back, but it honors their memory. Elias nodded, finding comfort in her understanding. And I was thinking about tomorrow, he added, about rebuilding what was damaged, my ranch, my life. Will you stay in Texas? Abigail asked, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. It's home now, he replied. Has been for 15 years. The land gets in your blood after a while. He turned to face her. What about you? Was that talk of teaching in Texas serious? Very, she confirmed. Clara will need time to heal, to find her path. I'd like to be nearby for her, well. She paused, gathering courage. And there are other reasons to stay. The unspoken hung between them, full of possibility. Elias, who had faced Confederate artillery with less trepidation, found himself hesitant before this new frontier. I'm an old man, Abigail, he said finally, set in my ways, damaged by war and loss. I'm not looking for perfection, she replied, just a man of honor, of courage and compassion. Her hand found his, weathered skin again smooth. I've seen who you are, Elias Carter, in the worst of circumstances, when it mattered most. Inside the house, laughter rose as Samuel told a story, Clara's voice joining in with surprising lightness. Even Nathaniel could be heard, his dry commentary eliciting more mirth. It won't be easy, Elias warned, though his fingers had entwined with hers. There will be talk, questions. Let them talk, Abigail said with the quiet confidence that had drawn him to her from the beginning. We've faced worse than whispers and disapproving glances. Elias smiled then, a real smile that reached his eyes and eased the lines of care that had marked his face for so long. Yes, he agreed, I suppose we have. As darkness settled over the Texas landscape, they remained on the porch, hands joined, two souls finding unexpected connection in the aftermath of violence and loss. Behind them, the warm light of Samuel's home spilled outward, creating a small island of communion in an often harsh land. The journey ahead would hold its own challenges, trials and testimonies, rebuilding and reconciliation, the complex work of creating something new from the ashes of the past. But in that moment, as stars began to appear in the vast Texas sky, there was peace. Not the empty peace of isolation that Elias had sought for 7 years, but the fuller peace that comes from purpose fulfilled and connections forged in adversity. A call of honor had brought him back into the world of men. And in answering it, he had found not just justice for those he'd lost, but hope for the life that remained to him.